Word is going around that Quizzy stayed up all night working in his shop again, and it looks like the guy finally hit his limit and passed out right there. Seeing him totally out of it, a girl comes over and says he's fast asleep, so they shouldn't do anything to wake him. She just looks at him and thinks about how exhausted he must be after all that work. She gently reaches out and pulls the blanket up to keep him warm while he rests. Moving on to Duke Olson's house, things are looking pretty fancy for a big event, but people are already gossiping, saying the Olson family made a huge mistake by trading a marquis's daughter for a baron's daughter. The guests keep talking, wondering if the Stewart family is actually going to stay quiet now that the engagement is officially over. This whole mess is going down right at Julian and Amelia's engagement party, and some people are even starting to say that if the Stewarts just accepted the split, maybe their daughter was the real problem all along. The crowd keeps talking, asking if the girl's name was Melanie and mentioning how she was actually pretty plain and never really stood out much compared to the others. Another guest acts surprised to hear it, and the gossip gets worse as someone claims the Lawrence girl straight up seduced Lord Julian. It gets even more awkward when someone points out she was actually best friends with the marquis's daughter. People can't believe she'd steal her own best friend's fiancé like that, and they figure with her looks she could get any guy, so she's probably just after the Duke's money. A guest walks up to Julian and says congratulations to him and the beautiful Lady Amelia on the engagement, but he admits he never really expected to see the two of them actually get engaged like this. Julian just brushes it off, saying the old engagement was just something their parents forced on them, and he's been pretty unhappy with that whole situation for a long time. Julian looks pretty satisfied as he tells Amelia that he's honestly just relieved to be done with Melanie, and he goes on about how he always knew that someone as beautiful as her would be the one, because in his mind, a smart woman with actual magical talent is a way better fit for him. Amelia acts all shy, hiding behind her fan and telling him he's being embarrassing, but she's totally thinking to herself that it's the truth. Melanie really was completely unworthy of a guy like Julian, and as far as she's concerned, the only thing the girl actually had going for her was her family name. One of the guests at the party pipes up and asks Amelia if she wasn't actually really close with the Stewart girl. Amelia doesn't miss a beat, telling them she only really kept her company because she was always all by herself. Julian backs her up, saying she was pretty much the only person nice enough to put up with someone as gloomy as Melanie. He tells her she's just way too kind, which makes Amelia give this little smirk behind her fan, especially since Melanie spent her whole engagement just hiding away at home and never showing her face to anyone in high society. Amelia continues playing the part of the devoted friend, claiming that Melanie didn't have anyone else to turn to but her. And then she stops for a second like she just remembered something, saying Melanie actually did have one friend, though she clarifies it was really just a snake. The guest looks completely confused and repeats the word snake back to her, so Amelia explains that it was Melanie's familiar, a big white one, and makes a comment about how the girl had zero taste. She keeps digging, saying it was pretty brave for someone with almost no magic power to even try keeping a familiar, which really shocks the guest. He can't believe a daughter from the high-ranking Stewart family would be lacking in magic like that. Amelia just gives this little smile and asks if he really hadn't heard the rumors yet. She tells him that Melanie was such a huge failure she couldn't even make it into the Magic Academy, and Julian jumps right in to agree, saying the woman was honestly just a total embarrassment to both nobles and mages. He looks at the guest and asks why he's so interested in hearing all this stuff about Melanie anyway. The guest wonders if Melanie was actually that bad of a person. He asks if she was just a problematic girl, but Julian cuts him off and says he better not be getting interested in her. He warns him that it's a bad idea and asks the guy if he seriously hasn't heard the news yet. The guest looks pretty nervous while Julian stares him down, asking what there is to even doubt about the situation, until the guest mentions hearing that Melanie got engaged to Quinn Blanchett, the top mage in the country. Julian and Amelia completely lose it, standing there in total shock. The story shifts back to the massive mansion where the Stewart family lives. It turns out Melanie is the 17-year-old daughter of one of the most famous magic families in the land. She's got fair skin and long, fluffy light brown hair, though she usually keeps a low profile. Up close, you can see she has these bright, jewel-like green eyes that really stand out, but she's so shy and timid that most people just think she's a gloomy person. It turns out Melanie actually had a fiancé around her same age, a guy named Julian Olson from a big-deal Duke's family, and the two of them were supposed to get married in just a few years. He leads her out into the garden area, and without any warning, Julian tells Melanie straight to her face that he's breaking off their engagement. Melanie just stands there totally confused. She can't even process it, wondering why he'd even bring her to the courtyard for this. Julian doesn't stop there though, casually saying he's decided to get engaged to Amelia instead. He drops Melanie's hand like it's nothing, immediately reaching out to grab onto Amelia's. Melanie looks down at her empty hands, completely stunned by how fast everything is falling apart, while Amelia stands right there with this smug, satisfied look on her face. Melanie can barely get a word out. She's just stuck there wondering what is even happening as Julian and Amelia look at each other like she isn't even in the room, leaving Melanie totally stranded in the background. Amelia puts on a fake sad face, telling Melanie she's sorry but she's actually fallen in love with Julian. Julian chimes in, saying he knows this is a huge shock but wants Melanie to try and understand his side. He claims Amelia has a big future as a mage, which makes her a way better fit to be a duke's fiancée. He gets right in her face and says she's nothing compared to Amelia because she barely has any magic. Melanie starts thinking back to how this all started, like how the Olsen family first reached out to her parents. They only wanted her family's support because the Stewarts are legendary mages with a ton of power. So she realizes now that she was just a convenient pawn for a political marriage this whole time. The real kicker was that she only got picked to be his fiancée because she was born with almost zero magic. Usually, magic runs in the family and gets passed down, but for some reason, she never inherited any of it, leaving her to be known by everyone as nothing more than the failure of the Stewart family. Melanie looks back at her life, remembering how everyone used to whisper about her being a failure, knowing the Olsen family only wanted her for her family's name, while Julian spent the whole time complaining. He never even tried to hide it, and his face always made it clear just how much he actually hated her, so she just kept her distance, letting 7 years pass by without them ever really becoming close at all. It didn't help that Julian was actually really smart and had the kind of looks that everyone noticed, meaning he was constantly surrounded by noble ladies who spent all their time fawning over him wherever he went. Being so plain and shy, Melanie felt like they had zero in common, making them fiancés in name only. But since their families had already made the deal, she knew the engagement wasn't something they could just end. She just went along with it, assuming they'd eventually get married once they were both old enough, mostly because she felt like this was the only way she could ever be useful to her family, but things didn't go as planned. Everything Melanie expected for her future just vanishes. The engagement is officially called off. Looking back, those old memories feel sweet but they're long gone, especially the time when a bunch of noble girls were cornering her. They kept telling her she wasn't good enough for Julian, just picking on her until someone suddenly reaches out and grabs her hand to pull her away. Melanie looks up, totally surprised to see Amelia standing there. She can barely even get a thank you out. Amelia just smiles and tells her she needs to start talking back. She's a Marquis's daughter too, and shouldn't let people treat her like that. It's crazy to think about now, seeing Amelia and Julian together. Julian has this smug look on his face while he talks. He says he's sure she already knows the deal, but he explains anyway. Amelia's family just became nobles because they created magic that makes spells faster and easier, basically saying she's perfect. She's smart, everyone likes her, and she's gorgeous, making it clear why he picked her. Melanie is stuck in her head, wondering if even Amelia secretly thought she wasn't good enough to be with Julian. She spent the last few days just sitting in her big bed crying, totally crushed by everything that happened when her brother walks in looking relieved because he was worried after she stayed hidden away for so long. He tells her to not let it get to her, saying Julian was never actually good enough for her in the first place. Her little sister jumps in too, agreeing with him. She's just glad Melanie isn't stuck with a guy who only has a pretty face. Even her father looks pretty beat up about it. He apologizes for ever making her get engaged to such a loser. He goes on about how the Duke's family has really fallen apart, not just with their magic, but as people too. Her mother agrees from the couch, saying they would have ended the whole thing way sooner if they knew he was such a fool. She tells Melanie she has nothing to feel bad about, and that the family is going to have to stop talking to the Olsens entirely. Melanie stays under the covers, but she finally speaks up, just to thank them all for being so worried about her. Melanie is completely lost, looking down and wondering what she's even supposed to do with herself now that her life is a mess. She knows everyone in high society is probably talking trash about how a Marquis's daughter got dumped for a baron's girl, and honestly, the embarrassment of the whole thing is just eating her alive. She eventually apologizes for venting to her family and tells them she's just going to go hide out in her room for a while. But as she shuts the doors behind her, someone calls out her name, though she doesn't stop. Back in the room, her dad looks totally crushed. He can tell that the breakup really messed with her head. Her little sister isn't being quite as soft about it. She thinks Melanie is overreacting and shouldn't be so depressed just because some duke's son dumped her, but then she turns on her dad. She tells him it's actually his fault for ever bringing that marriage proposal home to begin with. The dad just looks guilty, explaining he only agreed to it because he thought marrying into that family would help Melanie's self-esteem since she has no magic. Now he's just scared this whole disaster has destroyed whatever confidence she had left. Her mom adds that Melanie always cares way too much about what other people think, and she really wishes there was something they could actually do to help her, leaving the three of them standing there in total silence, just feeling bad that they can't fix things for her. Melanie's home, the Fostel Kingdom, is a place where magic is everything because monsters are constantly attacking the borders, and in this kingdom, having strong magic means you have high status, which is why all the nobles spend their lives studying it. Melanie's hand reaches out toward a row of old books on a shelf. While some families work tirelessly to create their own secret magical styles, others even set up marriages just to make sure their kids would have more mana, leaving Melanie sitting alone in the library, thinking about how a few days have passed since the engagement disaster. Her family, the Stuarts, were actually one of the top-tier mage houses, but she just looks down sadly, wishing she had the same kind of magical power her siblings were born with. She remembers her weak attempts at magic, where her water was just a tiny drop and her wind was a pathetic breeze, the main reason she couldn't even get into the academy. She thinks back to how she tried to fit in at parties just to be useful, but she realizes now it was all a waste of time. And standing there, she realizes that being hidden away in the archives is the only place she actually feels calm. Melanie stares at the shelves, thinking about how those old books were written in an ancient language she could barely read at first, but even though she actually finds it fun to decipher the ancient magic in the texts, she wonders if there's even a point to the research, and letting out a heavy sigh, she asks herself what she's even supposed to do from here as a white snake suddenly slithers up to her. Melanie looks down and recognizes the snake as Merle, asking what's wrong since the little creature is usually back in its room, but the snake just looks back at her with a happy, cute expression. Melanie gives the snake a warm smile and asks again what exactly brought it all the way out here. Just then, a man shows up and calls her name, saying he figured this was where she would be. Melanie looks up and sees it's her uncle Darius, telling him she's honestly surprised he knew her hiding spot, and Darius suggests having Merle show her around, while Melanie notes how the snake hardly listens to anyone but him, which is exactly what she expected. But it turns out it wasn't magic. Darius laughs and says he just lured her out with a treat, dropping the bait he promised right into the snake's mouth. Melanie changes the subject and asks her uncle if he actually needed her for something, or if he just came to check in. Darius tells her he heard from his sister that she's been down, and explains the whole family is worried since she hasn't been leaving the house. Looking for a way to help, Darius suggests she should head over to the Magic Academy for a little change of pace. Melanie looks totally caught off guard by the idea and reminds him she doesn't even have any magic power to begin with. Darius just smiles and tells her she can just help out as his assistant with some paperwork, since it's way better than sitting around at home. Moving on, the scene shifts to the massive towers of the Grand Magic Academy building, where someone is inside working like crazy. The sound of a pen scratching across paper fills the room as Melanie sits on the floor of her new workspace, completely buried under a mountain of research papers and notes. She finally looks up and cheers because she's finally finished, though she's totally wiped after pulling an all-nighter to get it done. On the table sits a small glass bottle filled with a glowing liquid, showing that her hard work actually paid off. Melanie stretches her arms high and lets out a big yawn, thinking about how she ended up finishing the whole project even though she only meant to do half. She leans in close to get a good look at the bottle and says that it's finally done. She feels a huge sense of pride knowing she actually managed to brew a real healing potion completely on her own. And it turns out Uncle Darius originally brought her on just to be his assistant at the academy, but she finished all her chores so fast that she was left with nothing to do. Darius decided to just hand her the keys to the lab, telling her there are plenty of extra rooms and she's free to use all the equipment. He reminds her that since he already taught her the basics of mixing medicines and using magic tools, she should just go ahead and use them however she likes. Melanie looks around the room, feeling a bit unsure as she asks if it's really all right for her to be using a professional workspace like this. Darius smiles and tells her that's not even the best part. She's actually allowed to sit in on the lectures with all the other students too. The news hits her hard and she starts shaking from the excitement, barely able to find the words to respond as Darius just laughs at her reaction and tells her to just focus on her research and have a good time with it. The academy is the go-to spot for young mages from all over the country, and thanks to all the high-end gear they have there, Melanie finally gets the chance to try brewing a healing potion from an old book she's been eyeing for a long time. It turns out that working with ancient, forgotten magic is a huge project, and it definitely isn't something she can just finish overnight. But she's excited and decides she's got to show her uncle, wondering how he'll react when she tells him she did it all herself. Melanie starts packing up her things in the lab and throws on her cloak to head out, while she tells Merle she's leaving and asks the snake to keep an eye on the lab for her until she gets back. The sun is way brighter than she expected as she steps outside, especially since the academy is such a massive, serious place for magic training. The whole campus is tucked away in the middle of a big forest. It's mostly full of noble kids, though some commoners with magic make the cut too. There isn't really a strict age limit for the students, but because of how noble society works, most of them are just teenagers. And even though they can graduate in a few years, plenty of them stay longer to make sure they're ready for whatever comes next. It's a competitive place, and some students even stick around for years just to try and land a spot as a prestigious court magician. Melanie looks around the quiet halls, thinking about how the academy is usually packed with people, but since morning classes just started, there's hardly anyone out. She's actually glad about it because it makes moving around easier, until she suddenly spots a couple of students standing near a pillar ahead of her. She immediately ducks behind a wall, shaking like a leaf and staying as quiet as possible so they don't notice her. One of the girls looks over like she heard something weird, but Melanie stays hidden and out of sight. Sweat is literally dripping down her face as she tells herself how incredibly scared she is of being seen. She grips her hood and tries to pull it even lower, deciding she's got to hurry and find her uncle before she loses her nerve. She starts sprinting down the hallway as fast as her legs can carry her, but everything goes sideways when she crashes into someone, sending all her research papers flying across the floor. Melanie is flat on the ground after the crash, looking up in shock as the guy she hit asks who she is. He leans down and asks if she's okay. And that's when she notices his purple eyes and the white robe he's wearing, which definitely isn't a student uniform. The guy gets really close to help her, making Melanie turn bright red as she stammers out a quick thank you. She stares at his face, completely stunned when she realizes she's looking at an actual court magician. Her heart starts racing and she can barely breathe, just totally overwhelmed by how intense the situation is. The magician stands there looking like something out of a dream, totally calm and collected while Melanie just freezes up. She's completely spaced out, staring at him with a blank look on her face until it finally clicks. She snaps back to reality and panics, realizing she's just standing there like a weirdo. She starts shouting apologies and bowing over and over, leaving the magician looking pretty confused by the sudden outburst. Without waiting for a reply, she drops down and starts frantically grabbing all her papers off the floor. Melanie is on her hands and knees in a total panic, yelling about her thesis papers being all over the floor. She's making all these stressed out noises, while Quinn just stands there watching her struggle to grab everything. Looking up from the mess, she suddenly realizes she's blocking the entire hallway and asks if she's in the way, which just makes her freak out even more. She starts bowing and apologizing like crazy, saying she needs to hurry up. But then a gust of wind catches the papers, and she can only watch as they start flying right out the open window. She stands there completely shocked for a second, totally unable to believe what's happening to her work. She rushes to the window and looks down, seeing her precious thesis pages scattered all over the bushes outside. Seeing one page stuck way out of reach on a plant makes her lose it even more, and she starts asking herself what she's supposed to do. More of the papers just keep drifting away into the sky, making the whole situation look like a total disaster. She knows she can't just leave them there, so she tells herself she has to go get them before they're gone for good. Melanie looks up and sees something that stops her right in her tracks. Quinn is just standing by the window, looking completely relaxed while he raises his hand as a glowing magic circle appears right above him. With a quick snap of his fingers, he sets the magic in motion. A massive whirlwind kicks up and pulls every single flying paper back toward the window, leaving Melanie totally speechless. The wind moves precisely, neatly stacking all the loose pages together until she realizes he didn't even say a single word to cast a spell that powerful. Watching him control all those different currents at once makes her realize just how high-level court magicians actually are. Quinn holds out the perfectly organized stack and simply tells her here they are. Melanie is still a bit stunned but quickly takes her thesis back, thanking him for saving her work. Melanie starts apologizing for bumping into him earlier. She's totally embarrassed and admits she wasn't even looking where she was going. Quinn doesn't say anything, he just stands there looking at her with that same intense, quiet expression. But then he suddenly leans in close, making Melanie freak out and freeze up as he reaches toward her. She realizes he's grabbing her hood, and before she can even react, he pulls it right over her head. Now she's completely red in the face and hiding under the fabric. She keeps apologizing for all the trouble she's caused. Without waiting another second, she yells out one last sorry and bolts away, leaving Quinn reaching out as she disappears. Quinn just stands there looking a little stressed. Realizing he might have handled that a bit awkwardly, he looks down at the ground outside and realizes she ran off way too fast. He actually wanted to tell her she missed a page. He starts thinking about how people always tell him he looks angry when he's quiet. He wonders if he just scared her off. He gives his fingers a quick snap to take care of the very last piece of paper. Quinn remembers Melanie saying that paper was part of a thesis, so he looks at it more closely. It's a lot for him to process, even though he's known as a total genius and the top court magician in the country. But as he starts reading, he gets confused and wonders what he's even looking at. The research on the page is so wild that it looks like a prank, yet Quinn can't help but wonder if Melanie was the one who actually wrote it. He stands there thinking for a second, then asks himself if that girl is the only lead they've got left, and decides right then and there that they need to go find her. The scene shifts over to a quiet room behind closed doors, where Melanie's uncle Darius Stewart is busy at work. He's from a big deal family, but he's also a high-ranking professor at the Magic Academy, and right now he's focused on a strange bottle, wondering if it's really a healing potion, since the thick purple liquid looks like poison and seems to be glowing. Darius thinks back to what Melanie told him, noting that real healing potions are usually pale green and smooth, unlike this. And then he shifts his attention over to the thesis paper, which is covered in messy handwriting. Melanie starts to get really nervous, sweating as she asks him how her work actually looks. Darius looks up from the pages and asks if she did all of this on her own, making her worry that she messed up. He doesn't sugarcoat it and tells her that pretty much everything about the presentation is wrong. Melanie is caught off guard, but Darius explains that the way the paper is written is just a complete mess. He goes on to explain that a thesis needs a specific order, like the topic, materials, and the actual results. Because right now, everything is just jumbled together and way too hard for anyone to actually read. Melanie starts to apologize, but Darius stops her and says she actually did a great job for her very first try. He smiles and suggests they just ignore the fact that some of the pages are missing for now. Melanie is totally shocked to hear that some of her pages are actually missing, and she realizes she probably dropped them earlier, so she quickly apologizes and offers to go grab them, but Darius tells her to hold on because he wants to have a serious talk with her first. Melanie is a bit confused by the sudden change in vibe, but she goes ahead and sits down like it's tough because she was the only one in the family born without magic, leaving her stuck at the estate while Darius felt bad for his niece, so he started teaching her the basics of magic on his own. Looking at her work now, he's blown away because even though he knew she was smart, this thesis is completely on another level, and he stays quiet for so long that Melanie has to check on him. Darius snaps out of it and apologizes for getting lost in his head before asking her where she even got the idea for this potion, specifically if she really managed to put the whole thing together from scratch. Melanie explains that the recipe is actually from an ancient text she found in her family's archives. Darius is totally stunned, repeating the words ancient text like he can't believe what he's hearing. Melanie confirms it's a book full of old magic formulas, mentioning she deciphered the whole thing and then tried brewing it, which makes Darius stop her right there, asking if she's serious about actually decoding that ancient text herself. He needs to be 100% sure, so he asks again if she really managed to decipher the ancient script. Melanie says that's exactly what happened, but she's starting to get worried and asks if there's a problem. Darius is just sitting there in total shock, asking her if she can really read the ancient language. She casually tells him she can, which makes him freak out and demand to know who taught her. Melanie gets a little awkward and says nobody taught her. She just kind of picked it up on her own by reading, so Darius is left completely speechless, just repeating the fact that she just picked it up. Melanie tries to explain her process, saying she can't quite put it into words, but she started noticing how certain words meant things like medicinal herbs or how to brew them. And that's how she slowly began to understand the patterns, until she was eventually able to read the whole thing. Darius just stares at her, thinking about how she talks like this is totally normal when it's actually a massive deal, since there are hardly any people left in the world who can actually wrap their heads around ancient languages anymore. Because it's such a rare skill, ancient books hardly ever show up in public, and the few that do exist are kept under lock and key. Darius knows the school has some of those texts and dictionaries in the restricted archives, but even then it takes years of study to use them, making him look at her in total disbelief, wondering if she really managed to decode everything without any help at all. He remembers her hiding away in the archives, but never imagined she had this much talent, and he doubts his sisters even know. Darius realizes what this means right as Melanie holds up a potion, explaining she brewed this healing liquid using one of those ancient recipes. She mentions some of the original ingredients don't even exist anymore, so she had to improvise a bit to get it finished. Melanie looks really happy as she explains how she put the potion together by using modern herbs that do the same thing as the ancient ones. Darius can barely believe what he's hearing, realizing she's a total natural as she tells him she already tested it to make sure it works exactly like a healing potion. She goes on to explain that once her parents taught her the basics, she just spent all her time in the archives, moving from modern magic straight into the ancient stuff, saying she just went through every old book in the mansion because she was having so much fun learning things she never knew. It didn't take long before she could read ancient languages perfectly, which explains why the best magician in the kingdom wanted her as his fiancée. Darius stares at the notes, still stuck on the fact that she actually pulled off an ancient recipe using basic modern tools, knowing that level of work takes a crazy amount of instinct and talent that most people just don't have. Melanie notices him spacing out and looks up with a confused face, asking her uncle if everything is all right. But he just gives her a quick smile and tells her it's nothing to worry about. He thinks back to how her parents wanted him to bring her to the academy as an assistant just to help her get over the breakup, but he realizes she's way beyond that. Darius looks at the academy building and thinks about how unfair it is that Melanie's genius stayed hidden just because she's low on mana. But Melanie sees his serious face and starts to freak out, thinking she might actually be in some kind of trouble. She begins to worry that she shouldn't have brought that ancient book from her house without asking anyone, or that she messed up by using the school's expensive ingredients to make her potion without getting the okay first. Even though her uncle told her she had free reign of the place, she's sitting there shaking and overthinking everything. She looks completely stressed out, wishing she had just kept things simple instead of showing off what she could do. Right as the tension gets too much, someone starts shouting for the professor from right outside the office door. The door flies open, and this stylish guy with long dark hair and earrings just strolls into the room, making Melanie stop in her tracks as she gets a good look at who it actually is. She realizes right away that he's the same guy she bumped into earlier, and he looks just as calm as before. Melanie starts panicking, wondering if this guy showed up just to complain about her. She's spiraling, thinking back to when they bumped into each other earlier and the guy just stands there with this heavy, serious look on his face. She hides her face, terrified that they actually chased her down after that encounter. Darius recognizes him immediately and calls him Quinn, asking why he's in such a big rush to get to work. Melanie is completely losing it, peeking out from her hiding spot while shaking like crazy. Quinn ignores her for a second to ask his uncle if the girl hiding over there is someone he knows. He mentions that his official work is already finished, but he stopped by the office to handle something else entirely, which makes Darius smile as he apologizes, telling Quinn he understands the situation but he's pretty busy right now, so they're going to have to catch up and talk another time. Quinn takes the hint and apologizes for the interruption, admitting he didn't realize his uncle was in the middle of a meeting. Quinn ignores the conversation for a second, staring at something nearby and asking the professor what it is. Darius starts panicking immediately, telling him it's just a failed batch of something and he should leave it alone, but it's too late. Quinn's already got his hands on the glowing bottle while Darius yells out his name in a hurry. Darius is sweating now, telling Quinn he can't just go around touching stuff without asking first. Melanie stays quiet under her hood, she's still trying her best to stay out of sight. Quinn doesn't seem to care about the rules though, as he holds the bottle up to get a better look. He's actually really focused, asking if the purple color in the liquid comes from a Catalmone herb. He keeps going, identifying stuff like Lyricbus root and Maberia pollen, while Darius tries to say it's not a big deal. Melanie is so impressed that she pops her head out, asking him if he can really tell all that just by looking, and that's when Quinn finally realizes who she is. He points her out as the girl from earlier, making her dive back behind Darius. Quinn just stands there in silence for a second, taking everything in while Darius starts apologizing right away, asking him not to take it the wrong way. He's sweating a bit, trying to explain that she's just really shy around strangers, but Melanie actually speaks up from behind him, asking if he's the one who found her paper. The three of them stand there in the hallway for a quiet moment until Quinn looks her straight in the eye and tells her he was looking for her. He lets out a little smile and holds up a page, saying he found another one. Melanie is completely shocked, her face turning bright red as she stares at him. Quinn doesn't hesitate and starts reaching out toward her, and then he leans in close, looking right at her while she just freezes up. Quinn leans in with a confident smile and tells them he wants to make a deal, asking right away to see the stack of papers Melanie is holding. Darius is sweating and looks totally caught off guard, yelling out Quinn's name as Quinn just watches him, saying that Darius's reaction basically proves the papers are the real deal. He mentions he's just been looking for the person who wrote such a cool paper, while Darius asks if he actually read the thing. Quinn explains that even though he only saw one page, he was totally blown away and really wants to check out the rest, standing there with a calm smile like he's just waiting for an answer. Darius lets out a big sigh and admits that if Quinn has already seen part of it, there's no helping it now. He turns to Melanie and asks if she's cool with letting Quinn read her work, and she just gives a quiet yes while she starts wondering if this guy really tracked her down just because of what she wrote. Melanie hides behind her uncle and asks him who that gentleman is, so Darius explains that his name is Quinn, he's a court magician, and used to be one of his students. Quinn doesn't say a word, just stands there looking over the papers with a serious face, while Melanie looks totally surprised to find out they have that kind of history together. Darius mentions that Quinn still shows up at the place every now and then for work stuff, and Melanie finally gets why he's dressed in that uniform, while her uncle adds that the guy was always a top-tier student. He keeps going, saying Quinn used to be small and cute back in the day, But now he's lost all that charm. Quinn finally snaps out of his reading and tells Darius to pipe down a little. Darius immediately apologizes for the chatter, looking a bit embarrassed, and then Quinn just goes right back to the pages, completely locked into what Melanie wrote. Melanie starts wondering if Quinn is actually a scary guy after all, but then she figures if her uncle says he's brilliant, the guy must be a seriously talented magician, so she thinks back to how amazing his magic was earlier, and it starts to sink in that a real-deal court magician is actually looking over her research. She gets a little wide-eyed and admits to herself that she's starting to feel pretty nervous about the whole thing, while Quinn stays completely quiet, just staring down at the pages in front of him. He finally puts a hand to his head and says he doesn't even know where to start, since the recipe is totally new and the methods completely ignore how things are usually done. Quinn keeps reading, sounding impressed by how complex and creative the work is, and he can't believe the kind of imagination and skill it took to get these results. He finally looks up from the papers and asks his old professor what exactly he's looking at, so Darius looks a little tense and tells him he might not believe it, but the whole thing was made using an ancient magic crafting method. Quinn is caught off guard and realizes that even though it seems like a brand new spell, the entire foundation for it is already perfectly set up. He notices the original ingredients listed are all from ancient times, and asks if they ended up swapping them out for all these crazy expensive materials. Quinn takes another look at the papers and realizes that when he thinks about it in terms of ancient magic, everything actually starts to click, but then he notices the ingredients list is insane, featuring stuff like lyricbus, which is basically extinct outside of labs, plus a bunch of other materials that cost a fortune. So he starts wondering how much a single bottle would even cost to make. And though he buys the ancient recipe part, he's stuck on what the actual results would be. He looks up and asks Professor Darius if he's actually gone ahead and tested out what this stuff can do yet. Even just thinking about the price tag makes him a bit uneasy, but he's so curious about the potential power that he kind of wants to see it anyway, even though Darius looks pretty nervous and admits that he hasn't actually tried it out on anything major just yet. Melanie starts to panic in the corner, while Darius quickly adds that he did at least test the effectiveness on a plant to see what happened. But Quinn just stares back with this really intense, heavy look in his eyes. Melanie completely loses it, pulling her hood down to hide while she stammers out an apology for speaking up when he hadn't even asked her anything. Quinn just stands there watching her, thinking to himself that he didn't actually mean to glare at her or scare her like that. Quinn stares at Melanie and can't really wrap his head around how a girl this shy and scared could actually be the one who made that magic potion. But as he keeps looking, the silence gets pretty heavy. Melanie is basically shaking under her hood while Darius tries to break the awkward vibe with a little cough, though Quinn is deep in thought, ignoring how much he's freaking her out. He realizes that just testing the potion on plants isn't enough and he needs to see what it does to something alive, so he looks back over her notes. He sees where she wrote about damaging and then healing a plant with the chemicals, which proves it works, but there's a huge gap between a plant and a living animal. He knows he can't just test it on himself since that's way too risky, and then he suddenly stands up. He tells Melanie and Darius to just hang out there for a minute and wait for him to get back, leaving the two of them alone as he heads out, the double doors clicking shut behind him. Melanie sits there on the couch feeling pretty stressed out. She asks Darius if he thinks Quinn finally got fed up with her and just left, but Darius tells her to hold on and relax, and then a few minutes pass by in silence until the doors suddenly start to swing back open. Quinn walks back into the room holding a large bird cage. He apologizes for making them wait and shows up with a small animal ready for testing. Darius looks at the birdcage and asks Quinn what on earth he brought back, and as Quinn sets it down, he explains that he grabbed a small monster called an echinos from one of the other labs. He mentions that the little guy had a nasty injury on its back, so he figured it would be the perfect test subject for the potion, and then he reaches into the cage with his gloved hands to pull the creature out. Holding the monster in his palm, Quinn gets the bottle ready and says he's going to give it a shot. He tips the flask carefully, letting just a single drop of the liquid fall onto the open wound, and Darius and Melanie lean in close with him, everyone holding their breath while they watch the reaction. Right before their eyes, the wound starts glowing and someone points out that it's actually closing up. And then they notice that even the broken needles on its back are completely back to normal like nothing happened. Quinn stares at the healed creature in total disbelief, saying he can't believe just one single drop was enough for the whole thing to work. Quinn says the potion is definitely working, and Melanie looks on happily, noting that the little creature looks a lot better already. So Quinn carefully uses his gloved hand to set the small monster back onto the floor of its cage. Darius points out that the results are basically the same as a high-grade potion, and Melanie totally agrees with him, while Darius adds that it's exactly what he expected from an ancient recipe, especially considering they only used a single drop. But then the cage starts to rattle. Quinn notices something and Melanie says things are starting to look a bit weird. The cage begins shaking like crazy on the table, and a sudden burst of energy flashes from inside the cage, leaving everyone wondering what exactly is happening as the cage continues to bounce around violently from the force of the creature inside. Once everything finally settles down, Melanie looks at the monster and asks if the poor thing is dead. Darius tells her that it's still alive, so Quinn asks if what they just saw was some kind of bad reaction to the medicine, but Darius explains that the potion was actually just so strong it caused a massive overreaction, leaving Quinn stunned that a single drop could have that much power. Quinn mentions that even a single drop needs careful watching, so Darius suggests they send the medicine off to get the components analyzed. Quinn totally agrees, saying it's definitely for the best if they keep the whole thing under strict control. While Melanie is busy scribbling away, Quinn looks over and asks what she's even doing. She just smiles and says she figured she might as well add this latest reaction to her research paper. Quinn doesn't really have much to say to that and just tells her he sees, but then he turns his attention back to Darius and calls out to him. Quinn asks the professor who the girl actually is, and Darius lets him know that she's his niece. This makes Quinn wonder if that means she's officially part of the famous Stewart family. Darius explains that she isn't actually a student at the academy, but they gave her a lab for a few specific reasons, and Quinn says he gets it watching her work. Quinn thinks it makes total sense since she comes from a family known for turning out so many powerful mages. Darius looks totally wiped out, admitting he had no clue the girl was this gifted until just now. It's honestly getting to the point where he says she's way too much for him to handle, and Darius isn't even sure how he's supposed to keep teaching her from here, making Quinn wonder if it's really that bad. Quinn realizes the potion really does prove her skills are on another level even as a court mage. He's never seen someone pull off an ancient magic formula. He knows ancient magic is powerful but super risky since there are so many things people don't understand about it, yet one bad slip-up with that kind of power could literally turn into a threat for the whole nation. Despite the danger, Quinn thinks it would be a massive waste to just leave talent like that alone. Melanie is just standing there looking pretty happy with her work, totally unaware of what he's thinking. Quinn decides to speak up and asks her what her name is, catching her a bit off guard as she looks up at him with a shy expression and says her name is Melanie. Quinn repeats her name to himself, just taking in the fact that he's finally talking to Melanie. She looks so young and innocent that he can't help but notice she's definitely not an adult yet, and looking closely at her big green eyes, he sees they're shaking with a lot of nerves. Her shy vibe doesn't really scream powerful mage or high-class lady, but that's exactly what makes her so interesting to Quinn as he just watches her. While her skill is obvious, Quinn realizes he's actually starting to care about who she is as a person, and that's a huge deal for him since he usually doesn't give a damn about anyone else. He figures it's pretty rare for him to feel this way about someone, so he decides to just go with these new feelings and see where things go because it might be fun. Quinn gives her a warm smile and asks Melanie if she'll become his apprentice. Quinn puts the offer out there, asking Melanie if she'll actually become his apprentice. Melanie is completely stunned, realizing in this moment that her life stuck in a birdcage might finally be over. She can't even process it, staring blankly while wondering if this is all just some huge mistake. But the situation is moving fast as Quinn adjusts his gloves, looking totally calm and serious about the offer he just made. Darius is losing his mind in the background, stammering Quinn's name and demanding to know what he's thinking, so Quinn doubles down, formally asking the professor to let him take his daughter away. Darius is sweating, mentioning that even though it sounds like a marriage proposal, he thought Quinn never took on students, and Quinn admits that's true, but he just can't let someone with her level of skill slip through his fingers. He makes it clear that keeping Melanie here would just be a total waste of her incredible talent. Darius looks away, admitting that while Quinn makes a fair point, he's still feeling pretty hesitant, sweating under the pressure while making it clear that he still just can't allow it. Quinn asks him why not, so Darius explains there's actually one huge problem with the idea of her being an apprentice. But Quinn doesn't look bothered at all, just asking if that's really supposed to be an issue. Darius finally says it out loud, telling him the truth is that Melanie basically has zero magic power, which makes the room go quiet as Darius keeps a serious look on his face. Quinn is completely caught off guard by the news, barely able to get a word out because Melanie is just standing there looking down, thinking she totally expected him to react that way. Darius goes on to say she isn't even a student at the academy and is only there as his assistant, somewhere she wouldn't normally be allowed to stay. And he points out that with her basic magic level, the only thing she can really do is mix up potions. Darius points to the potion tools, telling Quinn that the high-level attack magic he specializes in is basically impossible for someone with Melanie's low power level. He questions if Quinn is even serious about the apprenticeship, reminding him that his job involves hunting dangerous monsters all over the world for most of the year. Darius makes his stance clear, saying there's no way he can let Quinn take Melanie into those kinds of dangerous environments. Melanie just stands there quietly, feeling like everything is falling apart just like she expected. She's already convinced herself that Quinn is about to take back his offer the second he hears the truth about her, making her remember how every other person has reacted the same way, showing nothing but surprise, pity, and disappointment the moment they realize she's got no magic. It's a heavy feeling for her, especially being a daughter of the famous Stewart family and not having anything to show for it. She closes her eyes, waiting for the moment he decides she's worthless and moves on, but Quinn catches her off guard by suggesting she just comes to his estate to do her research there instead. Melanie is completely shocked, staring at him with wide eyes because she didn't see that coming at all. Darius tells Quinn to hold on a second, but Quinn just keeps explaining how his place is right by the castle, meaning he can teach Melanie the moment he gets back from his trips, and Darius looks pretty stressed, asking him if he's really for real about taking her on as an apprentice when she doesn't have a lick of magic. Quinn doesn't even blink, giving him a simple yes and explaining that his lab setup and materials are way better than what any other mage has, so she can just focus on her alchemy without any distraction. He turns to Melanie and asks what she thinks about coming to check out his estate, but she's completely stunned, barely able to get a word out as she tries to process the invite. She starts to say something, but Quinn reaches out and takes her hands in his, making him lean in close to tell her straight to her face that he wants her. And the air between them feels totally different now as flowers bloom, leaving Quinn just staring at her with an incredibly serious and focused look. Melanie is completely flustered, blushing hard as she stammers out Quinn's name while he holds onto her, and Quinn promises he'll never let her talent go to waste, practically begging her to come join him as her head starts to spin. She can't even think straight, just making random sounds while trying to find the right words to say. Darius finally steps in and calls out to Quinn to get his attention. Quinn asks what the professor wants, but Darius tells him he needs to let go of her hands immediately since he's making her uncomfortable. The grip he has on her is firm and serious, but just as Darius points it out, Quinn quickly pulls away and says he's sorry for overstepping. Melanie looks down, blushing even more as she tells him it's okay and that his hands felt big and warm. Quinn just stares at her, looking a bit surprised and moved by how sweet she's being, which leads to the two of them standing there in a quiet, shy moment while the air around them fills with flowers. Darius gets a serious look on his face and tells Quinn that if he really wants to take Melanie to his estate as an apprentice, there's one big condition. He says Quinn has to marry her. Quinn is completely lost for words while Melanie just yells out for her uncle, both of them totally blindsided by the idea, and she asks if this wasn't just supposed to be a simple apprenticeship. Darius doesn't budge, explaining that since she's not even an adult yet, having a young guy and girl living together is just not going to happen. And he adds that they have to make it official to keep her reputation safe, asking Quinn if he'd rather see people spreading nasty rumors about her. Melanie is shaking and can barely get a word out, just weakly trying to say no, but Quinn tries to reason with the professor, saying the whole thing is a bit extreme. He stops to think for a second, looking stressed as he realizes what's being asked of him, and finally he looks up with a serious face and agrees to the deal, saying he'll take her as his wife. Melanie stares at Quinn with wide eyes, calling out his name like she can't believe what he just said. Darius just smiles, looking totally satisfied as he tells Quinn that he's made a great point. Melanie starts to panic, sweating as she turns to her uncle and asks if he's really going to side with this idea too. Darius ignores her freakout for a second, saying they need to think about her feelings and start by just getting to know each other. He suggests that instead of rushing into a marriage, they should just stick to an engagement for the time being. Quinn just stands there looking completely calm while the whole situation unfolds around him. He looks at Melanie and points out that being engaged will keep people from talking, and then he just agrees to the plan. Melanie is losing it, waving her arms around while telling them they can't just drop a bomb like this on her out of nowhere. Darius tries to calm her down by saying Quinn is actually a good guy regardless of how he looks, and since he's his master he can vouch for him, but she just stands there looking totally overwhelmed, barely able to whisper no as the reality of the situation hits her. Darius gives a little smile and tells Melanie that if she ends up not liking Quinn, she can always just come back home later. Melanie stands there looking completely stunned by the offer. The words hang in the air, giving her a way out before things even start. But Melanie is already a mess, blushing and stuttering that it's hard to even think about that right now. The news of the engagement hits the whole place like a shockwave, leaving everyone buzzing. Cut to a few days later, and the setting shifts to Quinn's massive mansion right in the center of the capital. The official word is out, and it's clear the two of them are the talk of the town. Inside the living room of the mansion, everything is quiet as Melanie tries to settle in sitting on the sofa. She wonders how Uncle Darius convinced her father to let her stay at Quinn's house so easily. She looks back at the last few days as a total whirlwind, remembering how her parents just went along with the plan. The staff is busy hauling a massive pile of suitcases and trunks into the house, and it's clear Melanie is still trying to process it all, thinking about how she moved in before she even realized what was happening. Looking out the window, she sees the castle towers and realizes Quinn's place is way closer to the capital than her old home. The house itself isn't some giant palace, but it's new and clean, and he only keeps the staff he actually needs. Quinn is just standing there in his noble clothes looking completely calm. Melanie watches him, thinking he looked way more intense in his mage uniform, but now he just looks like a high-class noble. Even so, he's still got this heavy vibe that makes her think he's pretty intimidating just being there. A knock comes at the door and a voice from outside says they've brought some tea for them, so Melanie tells them to come in. The maid is literally shaking as she sets the tray down, looking like she's about to lose it. The maid yells a quick apology and bolts out of the room at full speed, leaving Melanie totally confused. Melanie looks down at the white snake in her lap, wondering if the maid was just freaked out by Meru, since the little snake is honestly such a good girl and hasn't done anything wrong. Quinn looks over at her and says the staff is just surprised because they aren't used to seeing something like that, but they'll get used to it soon enough. Melanie is a bit caught off guard by that and asks him what he means, so Quinn explains that while every mage's house used to have a familiar back in the day, it's actually pretty rare to see mages using them now. He points out that the servants here probably don't know much about how familiars work anyway. Melanie just stares back at him, asking if that's really how it is, and it turns out raising one of these creatures takes a massive amount of time and money, making it a luxury that only a few high-ranking nobles can even afford to keep around these days. Thinking back on it, Melanie realizes even people like Julian and Amelia didn't have any familiars with them. Melanie looks at her snake and remembers how Julian always hated Merle. It was the reason she always ended up leaving the little guy at home whenever the two of them met up. She's been trying so hard to keep Julian out of her head, but for some reason he keeps popping up even though her life with Quinn is officially starting now. Melanie starts to spiral, wondering if Quinn is actually okay with her being his fiancé or if her uncle just forced him into it. It gets worse when she remembers she can't even use magic, making her wonder if she can even handle being an apprentice to a court mage, especially since her uncle said Quinn is a total legend and super famous in the magic world. No matter how much she thinks about it, she just feels like she isn't worthy of staying here. She gets completely stressed out, terrified that Quinn is going to get disappointed and just kick her out on the street, but Quinn looks over at her and tells her she really needs to stop being so nervous about everything. Melanie looks up at him with wide eyes and softly says his name, Lord Quinn, while Quinn looks back, realizing that he might be asking way too much of her. After all, she was basically dragged to a complete stranger's house out of the blue, making it totally normal for her to be this tense. He decides to apologize for bringing her here so forcefully, but Melanie just looks at him confused and asks him what he means by that. Quinn points out that she probably didn't want the apprenticeship, or the engagement for that matter, and asks if he's right about that. She starts to get flustered, trying to explain that the apprenticeship is one thing, but the engagement was just something her uncle forced on him. But Quinn just gives her a calm smile and tells her that she's got it all wrong. Melanie is caught off guard as he admits the engagement was actually pretty convenient for him too. He explains that because of his age, everyone around him has been nagging him to get married, and he was getting tired of nobles constantly lining up with proposals, so even though her uncle's idea was kind of crazy, he figured it would be a blessing if it finally made everyone else shut up. Looking at Quinn, it's pretty obvious why he's such a catch. He's in his mid-20s, which is the perfect age to be married, and having a high-level job as a court magician definitely makes him stand out even more. Melanie realizes that on top of his status, his looks are basically top tier, leaving her staring at him while thinking about how he probably has women lining up to marry him. Quinn stays calm and explains that because of his situation, he wants their engagement to be a name-only thing, basically just for show. He tells her that even though he already cleared things with her parents, she's totally free to break the whole thing off if she's ever unhappy with how it's going, which just leaves Melanie sitting there in complete shock at how considerate he's being. Quinn looks her in the eye and mentions she's still young, so if there's actually someone else she's into, she shouldn't feel forced into this. Melanie jumps in immediately, telling him that she doesn't mind the arrangement at all, and she clarifies that she doesn't have anyone else in mind anyway, mostly because everything happened so fast she hasn't even had a second to process it. Melanie looks up at Quinn and admits that, to be honest, she's actually pretty relieved to hear him say that. She thinks to herself about how it's only been a few months since Julian dumped her. Her heart isn't totally healed yet, but Quinn's proposal makes her genuinely happy. Quinn takes that in and tells her he's glad to hear it, But then he reminds her that this engagement is just a temporary thing, even though he really does want her as his apprentice. He reaches out a hand and promises her that he's going to treat her right while she's learning from him, and he just stares at her with this super serious, honest look on his face. Melanie is caught off guard by how much thought he's putting into her well-being, realizing he's being incredibly sincere, which makes her feel special. She hasn't felt needed like this by anyone in a really long time. She starts wondering how long it's actually been since she felt this way, and even though she barely knows anything about Quinn yet, she can tell he's putting in a real effort to make her feel welcome. Melanie grips her dress tight, thinking about how even though she's still a bit unsure, she really doesn't want to mess up Quinn's expectations, so she decides she's going to give this everything she's got. She looks at Quinn and admits she's never even been to a magic academy and can't use magic, but she promises that as his new apprentice, she's going to work her hardest to make sure she doesn't bring any shame to his name. She sits there looking right at him, humbly asking if he'll please take the time to teach her everything he knows. Quinn gives her a small, genuine smile and tells her that as her mentor, he's going to work right alongside her, and that he's actually looking forward to it. Melanie lights up and happily agrees, feeling a huge weight off her shoulders now that they're on the same page. Quinn tells her that for today's first lesson, he's going to give her a full tour of his magic workshop, and Melanie is totally down for it, giving him a quick nod as she gets ready to see where the real work happened. The two of them walk through the garden as Merle follows behind. Melanie's heart is racing since they only did house rules yesterday, but now Quinn stops and says they've finally made it. Quinn shows Melanie into the room, explaining it was only supposed to be a small workshop for his research, but the place is absolutely massive, looking more like a giant library and laboratory hybrid than a regular room. Melanie is completely blown away by the size of it, mentioning how huge the workshop actually is, while Quinn explains that hunting down monsters on his expeditions and bringing back materials made the place grow bigger than his actual mansion. Melanie can't believe it, thinking to herself how rare it is for even high-ranking nobles to have a private lab on this scale. She looks at the endless rows of jars and supplies, asking Quinn if he really collected every single thing in here by himself. The two of them walk deeper into the workspace, passing by bundles of dried herbs and massive storage containers. Quinn confirms he did, mentioning that while he started the collection for research purposes, things changed because he hasn't had any free time lately, so now it's basically just a giant collection, which leaves Melanie staring at some taxidermy in shock. He keeps walking, casually adding that this is just what happens when your main gig as a court magician involves hunting monsters down. Quinn keeps the tour going, casually mentioning that for him, getting his hands on rare materials is actually remarkably easy, because he leads her up a grand spiral staircase to show her the rest of the massive collection. He explains that his job lets him get perfectly intact corpses of rare monsters, and once they're preserved, they end up stored away just like this. Quinn turns to her with a look of total confidence, telling Melanie he already went ahead and set up a room specifically for her to use. He shows her a desk loaded with books and gear, saying he figured synthesis research would be her main focus, so he got her a full set of equipment. The setup is top tier, and he tells her to just let him know if she finds herself missing anything at all for her work. The desk is covered in expensive-looking crystals and jars of ingredients, making it clear he didn't hold back on the supplies. There's even a nice couch by the window for when she needs a break from the books. It's basically the perfect workspace. Just then, Merle the white snake pops his head up, looking like he's in a great mood. Melanie is caught off guard as she watches the little snake slither across the floor right in front of her. Merle the white snake makes himself right at home, curling up on the cushions of the fancy couch, and Melanie can't help but notice, calling out to the little guy when she sees him looking so cozy. Quinn watches them, casually mentioning that it looks like Merle has already taken a liking to the place. But that's not all he has planned. He tells her he actually brought along a personal gift for her too. He holds out some white fabric, and Melanie looks at it, asking if he's giving her a robe. It's a long, clean piece of clothing that looks perfect for working in a lab setting. She puts it on and thanks him, saying that just getting her own research lab was already a huge deal. But the fact that they even went through the trouble of preparing a specific outfit for her is next level. She vows to do her absolute best to live up to what everyone expects of her, while Quinn just stands there, looking a bit lost before Melanie finally asks him what her actual day-to-day jobs as an apprentice are. Quinn looks at her and asks if it's true that she barely has any magic power, explaining that usually, an apprentice learns a master's style or helps with research, but Melanie just looks down, feeling bad and apologizing for her lack of mana. He gives her a small smile and says he isn't blaming her, just confirming the facts, then lets her know he took her on because her talent was interesting, not to find a successor. Melanie is completely caught off guard and asks what her actual job is supposed to be, so Quinn tells her he's been thinking it over, But first, he wants to hear what she already knows before they plan their next move. The two of them talk for a while inside the massive, quiet library, and Quinn rubs his head, saying he finally gets the level of knowledge she's working with. Melanie looks pretty worried and stutters while asking if she's just not good enough to be his apprentice, but Quinn tells her that isn't the case at all, saying he thought he knew a lot, but her knowledge is actually insane. He looks a bit stressed and realizes he's going to have to change how he handles teaching her, which just leaves Melanie standing there looking totally confused by what he means. Quinn brushes it off and tells her to ignore him, suggesting they get started by looking at her compounding process. He asks if she can remake the healing potion she did the other day, explaining that while he saw the results, he wants to see how she actually works. Melanie lights up and says she can definitely do it, and she's ready to give it a shot right now. She gets to work and explains that the last step is just pouring the boiled-down mixture into the vial, and before long, she's finished the whole thing with a big smile on her face. Quinn just stares at the result in total silence, looking so shocked that Melanie has to ask him if he's doing all right. Melanie just stands there looking proud and sparkly after finishing the potion, but Quinn is sweating a bit, saying that seeing her work in person makes him realize how insane her process really is. Melanie looks a little confused and says she wouldn't know since she's just following the recipe as written, though Quinn stops her, pointing out that she's clearly doing more than just copying, like she's updating the old ways for today. Melanie smiles and admits she did throw in a few of her own twists to the ingredients and how she mixes everything, and Quinn tells her that's exactly why it's so impressive, thinking her lack of formal training actually helped her. He's honestly blown away that she could just come up with a whole new way to make it on her own. He starts worrying that teaching her the normal basics might actually mess up her unique style, though he still thinks it might be good to know them, which leads Melanie to ask him if something is bothering him since he's acting weird. Quinn finally says the real headache is going to be the cost. Using such pricey materials for every batch is a total problem. Quinn starts thinking it over and suggests they should look into finding some cheaper materials to use as substitutes. And Melanie agrees right away, saying the current potion is way too strong anyway, while secretly thinking he's being a bit childish. Quinn keeps muttering to himself, focused on the idea that she needs to get the basics of compounding down before anything else. He looks at her and tells her she should start by researching ways to actually improve that healing potion, which totally catches Melanie off guard. But she says she's down for it even though the suggestion came out of nowhere. The lessons start immediately, and Quinn gets strict, telling her she can't pour the liquid in first because the ingredients will just clump up. So he tells her to scrap it and start over, leaving Melanie looking completely flustered as she tries to keep up. He doesn't let up for a second, ordering her to chop the herbs much finer this time, and she quickly promises to do it. But even then, he spots another mistake and snaps at her that she's getting the order of the steps all wrong. Melanie is basically losing it at this point, panicking and apologizing while she tries to satisfy his sudden high standards. Melanie keeps trying to pour the mixture while Quinn stands right behind her, watching her every move like a hawk. The pressure is clearly getting to her as she starts panicking and struggling to keep a steady hand. She looks completely drained by the time she's done, just standing there with a totally exhausted look on her face. Quinn watches her for a second before telling her that seeing her work just made everything way too obvious. He says she's clearly lacking the basic fundamentals, and it's honestly a miracle she even managed to make that first potion. Melanie looks down at the ground, feeling totally defeated as she quietly apologizes for messing up. But Quinn's tone softens a bit as he tells her she doesn't need to be so scared of him. She catches herself and gasps, realizing that she's falling back into her old ways without even thinking about it. She knows her habit of getting all timid is bad, especially since it's something Julian and Amelia used to bring up all the time. She remembers Julian looking at her with total disgust, telling her that just seeing her irritated him and asking why she couldn't act like a lady. The memory of Amelia's voice hits her hard, reminding her that everyone only makes fun of her because she acts so weak. Melanie tries to shake it off, telling herself she has to pull it together and stop letting it get to her. She stands there staring at the table, knowing she can't stay like this forever. But it's not like she can just fix her entire personality overnight. The thought of Julian and Amelia abandoning her because of how she is keeps looping in her head. It's enough to make her feel completely pathetic, and she can't even stop the tears from starting to well up. But then Quinn speaks up, telling her there's really no reason to put so much pressure on herself like that. A single tear falls as she listens to him. She's clearly struggling to keep her emotions in check while Quinn keeps it real with her, saying she's a total amateur at magic and shouldn't expect to get everything right immediately. He looks at her for a second, his expression softening as he sees how tense she is. He steps up and puts his hands on her shoulders, telling her she just needs to relax a little bit. Melanie looks up at Quinn with tears still in her eyes, just surprised by how patient he's being, and quietly says his name. Quinn gives her a small smile and holds up a beaker, suggesting they just give the whole thing another shot. She wipes her face and agrees, feeling a lot more motivated to actually get this right. The two of them get back to the workbench, with Melanie carefully stirring the mixture while Quinn looks over the magic book, and she starts sweating from the pressure, focusing everything she has on the dropper as she adds the next part. They both lean in and watch the container together, waiting to see if the reaction goes the way it's supposed to. The liquid inside the flask begins to swirl and give off these bright little sparkles. Melanie looks over at him, sounding pretty nervous as she asks how the final product turned out, and Quinn inspects the flask, telling her it's a huge improvement and they should probably try switching up the materials next. Hearing that makes her day, she starts celebrating, super hyped that she actually managed to pull it off. Melanie is feeling good and says she'll keep working hard, mostly because she's just hyped that Quinn actually praised her. She looks over the supplies and figures that one specific ingredient probably has the best healing power out of everything there. She spots another bottle and realizes it could actually work as a substitute if they need one. But then Quinn reaches over her to grab it, saying that even though it's not impossible to use as a backup, the price is way too high for them and she needs to put it back right now. The look on his face totally freaks her out, so she just quickly agrees to do what he says. It makes her realize she's still got a long way to go before she's actually a worthy apprentice for him. Looking out the window, she thinks about how it's already been a few days since she moved into his mansion. At the start, she was pretty on edge about being in such a new place, but lately she's been getting closer with the staff and finally starting to feel more at home. Melanie thinks back to when she first arrived. She honestly had no idea how to act around Lord Quinn, especially with him taking her in as both his apprentice and fiancé. But after spending time studying magic by his side, she's finally starting to get a better feel for who he is. It's clear to her now that he has this crazy amount of passion for what he does. And even though his teaching style can be pretty harsh at times, he's just incredibly dedicated to the craft. She remembers going off to bed while he stayed behind, just locking himself away in the room all by himself. He spent the whole night in there, completely buried in research and trying to figure out ancient languages. Seeing how hard he pushes himself makes her wonder if she's even the one who's supposed to be the apprentice here, and sure enough, he ended up pulling another all-nighter locked away in the workshop. The servants started getting worried about him skipping meals, so they asked her to take a breakfast basket up, leading to Melanie standing outside the heavy workshop door, softly asking if he's actually in there. Melanie slowly pushes the door open and peeks inside the workshop, finding Quinn sitting there with his eyes closed, looking like he's finally crashed for the night. Everything on the desk is still laid out, with the morning light just starting to hit the room, and Melanie walks over quietly, seeing him totally passed out in his chair while she whispers that he's sleeping so soundly. She looks down at his hands and notices he even left his book wide open, which worries her a bit, thinking he's definitely going to catch a cold if he stays like this. So she realizes she needs to find a blanket or something to keep him warm. She finds a cover and gently drapes it over his shoulders, telling him she'll try her best not to wake him up. Just looking at him, it's pretty clear to her that he must be completely exhausted. She carefully takes the heavy book from his lap, amazed that he didn't even wake up when she pulled it away. Melanie stands perfectly still, just taking in the quiet atmosphere of the workshop while she stares at Quinn's hair, thinking about how straight and beautiful it looks. She even wonders if he has some kind of special routine to keep it that way, because it's the complete opposite of her own hair, which she thinks is just way too frizzy and hard to manage. As she sits there on the floor next to him, it hits her that she almost never gets the chance to see him from this close, and the thought of it makes her blush, making her want to just stay right there and watch him sleep for a few more minutes. The morning sun starts to fill the room, lighting up the flowers nearby as the quiet moment lingers, until Quinn suddenly stirs in his chair, letting out a small groan as he starts to come around. Melanie jumps a bit and quickly tells him good morning, which catches him off guard since he's still half asleep and asking if it's really her. He rubs his eyes, trying to clear the cobwebs and figure out what's going on after his long night of work, finally looking over at her with a blank stare as the reality of the morning starts to sink in. Quinn wakes up in the middle of the library and realizes he totally drifted off while his desk is still a mess, piled high with all the books he was studying. Right then, Melanie is standing over him, carefully pulling a cloth up to keep him warm. He sits up looking pretty groggy and asks her what time it is, which makes him stop and notice the fabric draped over his shoulders. Realizing it belongs to her, and Melanie immediately starts apologizing, saying she tried to find a real blanket to cover him with but couldn't find anything else. Quinn gives her a soft smile, telling her to forgive him for the trouble and thanks her. Watching him blush like that makes Melanie think he looks way too cute for his own good. She starts panicking a little, wondering if it's actually rude to think a high-ranking guy like him is cute, but Quinn spots a basket nearby and asks what's inside, so she tells him the chef sent over some breakfast, even if it's basically lunchtime now. Quinn looks at the massive pile of food in the basket and asks if the chef included enough for Melanie too, realizing he's been out for a while. Since they're both there, he asks her if she wants to grab a seat and eat with him, which makes Melanie jump and give a loud yes. She thanks him and mentions that while they usually eat together back at the house, this feels like a special change of pace. Eating alone with Quinn in the quiet workshop is honestly pretty exciting for her, and she can't help but smile. Quinn takes a bite and mentions the salty meat and fresh veggies are actually really good, even if it's a bit heavy. But then Melanie freezes with her mouth full when she notices he's already starting on his second sandwich. She can't believe how fast he's going. He doesn't even look like he's in a hurry, but the food is just disappearing. Quinn catches her just staring at him and asks if something is wrong, making Melanie freak out and stammer that she was just thinking she should have brought some drinks to go with everything. He gives her a small smile and tells her she's right, then asks her to stay put for a second while he gets something. Melanie looks up in total confusion and asks Quinn what he's doing as he suddenly stands up. She starts panicking and tells him he really doesn't have to go through all that trouble just to get a drink. But as he heads toward the medicine cabinet, she feels terrible and admits she only suggested the drinks to hide the fact that she was staring at him. He ignores the apology and walks over to a nearby workstation covered in glassware and lab tools. So Melanie watches him closely and asks if he's seriously heading for the alchemy table right now. Quinn doesn't say a word, looking completely calm while he picks up a large glass flask and begins carefully prepping some ingredients inside the glass with total focus. Melanie sees bubbles and a magic circle start to form and asks what's up, completely confused by why he's using magic for this. She watches the liquid swirl around and asks what on earth he's even trying to make, but he just keeps working, holding the flask over the glowing magic circle as the liquid starts to change. The liquid inside the flask starts bubbling like crazy over the glowing magic circle, making Melanie look on with a totally shocked expression as she tries to process what he's doing. Quinn reaches for a glass beaker on the table and asks if that'll work as a cup. He looks completely relaxed while pouring the hot, dark liquid into the glass. So Melanie nervously asks what he just made, and he simply tells her it's just herbal tea. She takes the beaker with both hands, staring at it while repeating that it's just medicinal tea. As she looks closer, she realizes the color and the smell actually do seem like normal tea, but Quinn notices her hesitation and asks what's up, explaining it's an extract meant to help with fatigue and health. He takes a drink himself and asks if she's worried about the beaker being clean since it's been washed. Then he looks away slightly, mentioning that the hygiene isn't really the main issue here. Melanie watches him and thinks to herself that for someone so powerful, Quinn is actually pretty careless, but she decides to just put that thought to the side for now. Looking at the beaker, she realizes that magic can actually be used for simple stuff like this, and she wonders if he always brews his tea this way, especially seeing how easily he handled the magic circle just now. She holds her drink and finally asks him if this is how he always drinks his tea, so Quinn takes a sip and tells her he only really does this on special occasion. He takes a bite of his food and explains he doesn't do it at home, but it's a common trick for camping that most nobles wouldn't touch. He mentions they actually teach it in outdoor classes at the Magic Academy since learning to heat water perfectly is good training. Melanie remembers hearing that Quinn is always out on monster hunts and that he's part of the offensive magic division for the court mages. She thinks about how it was her uncle who gave her all that info in the first place. Darius Stewart looks pretty proud while explaining that Quinn is an elite mage who was picked for a special division. Melanie looks down at the picnic supplies and says that sleeping outside while hunting monsters in the wild sounds like such a grind. She looks a bit spaced out and mentions she's almost never left the capital, so she can't even imagine what that kind of life is like. She looks at him and says she'd love to learn more from him, but asks if he'll be away for work all the time. Quinn suddenly remembers something and tells her he actually has to head out starting tomorrow. Melanie just stares at him in shock, repeating the word work like she can't believe it, so Quinn explains he was taking time off to look after her, but some urgent business just landed on his desk. He looks down at his papers and tells her he'll likely be gone for a few days. Melanie takes it in and simply says she sees. Standing among the flowers, it finally clicks for her that Quinn is supposedly one of the best royal mages in the whole kingdom. Melanie realizes that someone with Quinn's status couldn't just stay on vacation forever, and Quinn tells her not to stress, because while he's away, he's giving her a specific task separate from her usual mixing work. He says it's something she can do on her own and she should focus on that and her studies, so he mentions she'll be way too busy to ever get bored, asking her if that sounds like a good plan. Melanie stammers out a thank you while blushing, but she's secretly freaking out because she thinks he just read her mind. The scene moves to the outside of Quinn's massive, fancy estate. Quinn looks at her one last time and says he's leaving the whole place in her hands. The staff wishes him a safe trip, while Melanie tells him to take care of himself, and the carriage finally pulls away as Quinn heads out to handle a monster-slaying job. Melanie stands there thinking about how this is her very first time being at Quinn's estate. She looks a bit overwhelmed by the thought of being home alone in a place like this. Melanie thinks about how everyone at the manor treats her so well that she honestly doesn't need a single thing. She's even started to get really attached to Merle, the little snake. It's a huge change for her, because even when she stays in the lab for hours working on her magic studies, nobody ever gets mad at her. She keeps thinking about how back at her old house, she used to get lectured and chewed out all the time for things like that. Sitting there, Melanie realizes she's actually way more comfortable now than she ever was growing up. And it's getting to the point where she almost feels a bit guilty. The thing is, an apprentice is usually the one who's supposed to look after their master's daily needs, but the servants at the estate already have every single chore covered, leaving Quinn to handle pretty much everything else on her own without any help. Melanie sighs, feeling like she's just the one getting pampered and looked after for every little thing. She really wants to find a way to thank Quinn for everything, but she's worried that a sheltered girl like her doesn't have much to offer. The little white snake, Maruru, nudges closer as if it can tell what she's thinking. Melanie looks down and asks the little guy if he's actually trying to comfort her right now, which is honestly the cutest thing. She gives him a soft smile and tells him thank you for being there for her, but then she notices something different. Maruru is looking way shinier than usual, almost like he's sparkling, so she asks him if he just happened to molt. She leans over to check his basket and lets out a surprised sound when she sees what's inside. Melanie pulls it out to get a better look, noting that it's a perfectly clean shed, and as she holds the skin, a thought hits her. She wonders if Quinn would actually be happy if she gave this to her as a gift. After all, she knows that snake skin is a super valuable material for magic research, especially when it's in such perfect condition like this one. Melanie's face just lights up. She thanks Maruru again and tells him he must be worn out after all that molting, so she promises to go grab him some food right away. She just stands there giggling to herself, feeling totally happy while she hangs out with her scaly little friend. Moving on, a servant calls out from the mansion to let her know that Lady Quinn has finally made it back home. Melanie hears the news and goes sprinting down the main staircase. She's got a huge smile on her face as she tells Quinn welcome back. Quinn says she's home, standing there looking cool while the staff takes her coat, but Melanie stops and says her name, noticing Quinn is acting a little different than usual. The two of them just stand there in the quiet foyer for a moment. Quinn looks away and covers her face, saying it's actually pretty embarrassing to be welcomed home with that much energy. Melanie starts blushing like crazy just thinking about how she came off, and she wonders if she was just too hype because she was happy Quinn was back. It kind of makes her feel like she was actually longing for a lover or something. She can't help but think that the two of them really do act like they're engaged. Melanie tries to hide her face while the maids in the back just stand there smiling at the whole scene. Quinn looks a bit drained and apologizes for the work taking way longer than expected. Melanie tells her it's fine because work is work, so she shouldn't even worry about her. Quinn says she can't really do that since she's the one who took her on as an apprentice. She asks how things are going with the assignment and if Melanie needs help with anything she doesn't get. Melanie realizes Quinn is just being super thoughtful because she had to stay behind while Quinn was out. She's blushing and looking happy as she tells Quinn she actually finished everything without any trouble. Quinn gives a little smile, just glad to hear that she's done. But then she stops and leans in, totally shocked that Melanie actually finished that specific task already. Melanie just nods and says the assignment was actually really interesting, and since it was her first time ever doing magic circles, she was a bit worried but thinks it'll actually activate. Melanie gives a little smile while mentioning how tough it actually is to add attributes to magic circles. She explains that she started out by trying a formula to boost fire power, but it just wasn't working out, so halfway through the project, she realized she should probably stop messing with formulas and try using tools instead. Quinn looks pretty stunned, just repeating the idea of using tools for attribute enhancement back to her. Melanie confirms it, explaining how old books say people used to make their own magic ink before it was sold in stores. She's looking pretty proud of herself as she describes how she followed those old steps to add fire affinity ingredients to the mix. She's basically glowing as she tells Quinn that the whole experiment ended up being a total success. Quinn stands there with a hand on her head, just trying to process this. Melanie keeps going, saying she's already started mixing all kinds of stuff into the ink to see what other reactions she can get, but she stops when she notices Quinn's reaction and asks if she's alright. Quinn gives a little smile and says it's nothing, then tells her he'll check it out later. Melanie gets all excited and asks him to give her a good grade, but then she stops and calls out to him again, making Quinn look back and ask if there's anything else she needs. Melanie holds out a small box while looking really nervous and says she has a present for him, so Quinn reaches out and takes the box from her hands. She explains that it's a way to thank him for everything and tells him to open it up right now. Quinn wonders what it could be, even though he reminds her that she doesn't have to be this nice. But when he opens it and pulls out a long, clear strip of something, he has to ask what it is. Melanie beams and says it's Marilou's shed skin. Bragging about how perfectly it peeled off, Quinn just stands there looking strained, but he manages to thank her and says he'll find a use for it. Quinn gives a small smile as Melanie shouts, "Yes," with pure excitement, clearly thrilled as she starts to head off. Later that night, Quinn's friend Kevin sits in a fancy room. Admitting he never thought Quinn would actually get engaged, Quinn sits across from him looking pretty over it, asking Kevin just how many times he's going to keep saying that, but Kevin just beams and tells him it's fine, insisting they have yet another toast to celebrate the big news. So he leans over and starts filling Quinn's glass back up with wine, even though the guy is clearly enjoying himself way more than Quinn is at the moment. Quinn takes a sip but looks a little stressed, asking exactly how many times they've toasted by now. Kevin just laughs it off, saying his best friend got engaged and asking why it would be wrong to drink to that. Quinn starts sweating a bit, thinking about how weird it is for the prince, the guy first in line for the throne, to be breaking out his private stash for a court mage. Kevin just tells him to relax since they're friends, though he adds that while Quinn is a top-tier mage, he's basically hopeless at being social. Kevin keeps talking about the news, admitting he thought the whole engagement was a joke at first and still has his doubts. He says it's the truth, though he does give Quinn credit for being a pretty handsome guy. But he also calls him a disaster in every other way, pointing out his lack of charm and how he's always out of the country. Kevin is still stuck on the fact that a guy with zero social ambition like Quinn is now engaged to a daughter of the Stewart family. So he looks right at him and asks what on earth happened to make him change his mind like this. Quinn starts sweating a little, trying to explain that technically she is just his apprentice. He takes a sip of wine and says it couldn't be helped, since the engagement was the only way he could take her on as a student. Kevin pours more wine and says he's actually surprised about that part of the story too. He asks what exactly brought about this change of heart that made Quinn finally decide to take on a pupil. Quinn just stares ahead while Kevin keeps topping off his wine glass. Kevin points out that Quinn turned down a massive amount of people who were desperate to be his apprentice. So Quinn explains that he honestly thought Melanie would just give up if he entertained the idea for a bit, but she didn't budge. He says it's impossible to just ignore someone with that level of talent. But Kevin is surprised to hear that from the top mage in the country, asking if she is really that amazing. Quinn describes her as a huge mass of raw talent and a total anomaly, wondering what her uncle Darius has even been doing this whole time. Kevin remembers that Darius was Quinn's mentor and realizes that he's part of the Stewart family too, which leads Quinn to confirm that Melanie is actually the professor's niece. Kevin takes a sip of his wine and asks if that makes her some kind of magical thoroughbred, but Quinn drops a bombshell, saying she actually has almost no magical power and hasn't even been to school, leaving Kevin looking absolutely shocked by the news. Kevin can't believe his ears and asks Quinn if he seriously took someone like that on as his apprentice. He says he's never heard of a royal mage training someone with zero magic, especially a failure from a family of legendary casters. Quinn explains that since Melanie was self-taught, no one actually realized how much talent she had, so she almost got married off to a duke's family instead. And hearing about the duke's family makes Kevin go quiet for a second as he thinks it over. Quinn notices the look on his face and asks him what's up, so Kevin says it's nothing big. He just remembered a bit of gossip he heard a while ago. He mentions the Olsen heir apparently dumped his fiancée just to chase after her best friend, that Lawrence girl. He keeps the rest to himself, thinking about how even the royals are secretly terrified of the House of Stewart. And he realizes it's pretty wild that the girl from the scandal is the same one who's now Quinn's apprentice and fiancée. Fate's weird like that. Quinn just looks a bit bothered by the whole thing and asks if that's really what happened. Kevin can't help but laugh a little, asking Quinn if he seriously had no clue the gossip was about his own fiancée. But Quinn just keeps it professional, reminding him that Melanie is his apprentice first and his fiancée second. Kevin watches him closely, thinking it's pretty rare to see the usually cold Quinn show this much interest in anyone. And even though he's dying to tease his friend, he holds back because he doesn't want to ruin the mood before he gets all the details. He takes a casual sip of his wine and asks what kind of talent this girl actually has to make her so special. So Quinn gets serious, telling him she has a ton of skills, but the big one is that she can read ancient script. The news hits Kevin like a truck, and he ends up spraying his wine everywhere in total shock. He wipes his face, yelling that there's absolutely no way she can actually read a dead language like that. Quinn just looks at him and confirms it's the real deal, adding that she even managed to teach herself, leaving Kevin completely floored by the idea of someone being self-taught in a language that most people think is extinct. Kevin is losing it, pointing out that even the royal palace has teams of experts who take days just to translate one page, so someone who can actually read it is basically a gold mine. He looks at Quinn in total disbelief, asking if a random 17-year-old girl really managed to pull that off. But Quinn just plays it cool, explaining that according to Melanie, she can only handle the magic-related stuff, which is still way more than enough for them. He keeps going, telling Kevin that she can even piece together ancient magic recipes from the old language, even though Melanie modestly claims she's just self-taught and barely knows what she's doing. The sheer scale of it finally breaks Kevin's brain, leaving him standing there with a blank stare just trying to process what he was just told. Since trying to bring back ancient magic is pretty much the hardest research project anyone can take on right now, even for the elite court mages Quinn works with. The crazy part is that those top-tier researchers haven't actually made any real progress on it yet, but rumor has it that Melanie actually cracked the code on part of an ancient book recently. And if Quinn is telling the truth, this is a massive deal that would turn the whole country upside down, especially since that magic is hundreds of years old. Back in the day, mages were on a whole different level with massive mana reserves and insane precision, making Melanie's discovery a potential game-changer. Quinn explains how over the years, magic was simplified so much that the ancient ways eventually just fell out of use. On top of that, he mentions how the actual mana capacity of modern mages has dropped compared to the past, which makes Kevin wonder how a regular human could even begin to handle ancient magic in this day and age. Kevin tells him to wait a second, pointing out that since Melanie has almost no magic power, he doesn't get how she's using it. Quinn clarifies that actually casting spells isn't the only way to do sorcery, since things like mixing potions or making magic circles don't require any internal power. And it turns out Melanie's real specialty is actually pharmaceutical studies and alchemical research. Kevin says he sees what he means, though he's clearly still sweating a bit from the sheer scale of what she's doing. Quinn points out that while everyone thinks of sorcerers as people who just blast offensive magic like Kevin does, the truth is that back then, there were way more researchers than there were combat mages, including specialists like apothecaries working on medicine and alchemists building complex magical tools. Kevin tries to wrap his head around it, asking if Melanie really just spends all her time on research. But Quinn points out that even for research, you usually need a decent amount of mana and magic training to get anywhere. Kevin can't believe it, asking if she seriously pulled all of this off just by studying on her own without ever stepping foot in an academy, which Quinn says is just the kind of thing you'd expect from a girl born into the Steward family. He gets a bit more serious, mentioning that it actually might have been dangerous if she had any real magic power of her own, and explains that because she didn't have mana, she had to rely entirely on herself, which led to her doing way more than just fixing old spells. Looking through her notes, he shows how she's actually blending ancient techniques with modern magic, and Kevin realizes that merging the two styles like that is a massive achievement. Quinn agrees, saying that what she's doing is basically creating an entirely new category of magic, leaving Kevin completely floored and sweating from the realization of how incredible she actually is. Quinn agrees with him, and then Kevin asks if there's a real chance she could end up destroying the world if things go south, especially since Quinn says that's exactly why he decided to take her in from the start. He figures he's probably the only one who could actually handle her if anything ever went wrong. Kevin smiles, saying she must be one hell of an apprentice to make him go to those lengths. He's curious to meet her, but figures that with a master like Quinn, the girl is probably a total monster herself. Moving on, Kevin brings up that even if she's a genius disciple, he's more interested in how she is as a fiancée, and Quinn just looks at him, totally over the conversation already. But Kevin won't let it go, pointing out that Quinn has never had a single rumor about his love life before, and he's just dying to know what it's like for him to be living under the same roof with a woman. Quinn just shuts it down immediately, reminding him that she's still just a kid. Kevin points out that at 17, Melanie is already a fine young lady and asks Quinn if he's really not interested at all, because Quinn admits he can't really take his eyes off her, mostly because she's an innocent, sheltered girl who has no clue how much talent she's actually hiding. He goes on about how if he leaves her alone, she'll waste expensive materials or try crazy experiments that almost blow up the cauldron, saying she surprises him constantly. Kevin just reacts with a surprised look, taking in how much Quinn is actually saying. He realizes it's super rare for Quinn to be this interested in anyone, and even if Quinn denies it, it's pretty clear he doesn't see her as just a student. Kevin thinks to himself that this whole thing might actually turn out to be a good influence on his friend. But then the scene shifts to the day after the toast, where Quinn is sitting in his library wondering just how much potential Melanie really has. On his desk sits an open box containing a piece of shed skin next to a magic circle. Quinn just stares at the item in total silence for a moment. He picks up the skin with his gloved hands, thinking that no matter how many times he checks it out, it really is a top-tier specimen. Quinn sits at his desk looking at the shed skin, noting it's freshly molted and in perfect shape. He realizes that while any snake this size is rare, a giant white one is on another level. He starts wondering exactly how much a masterpiece like this would actually sell for on the market. It blows his mind that Melanie just handed it over to him like it was nothing. He stares at the box, sweating a bit as he wonders if the girl even knows she's holding onto an incredibly high-end luxury item. The thought of it is wild, especially since a commoner could live their whole life off the profit. And since snakes shed every year, it's basically a guaranteed fortune. But despite its value, Melanie just treats the massive snake like a normal pet and showers it with love. Quinn finds the whole thing bizarre because reptiles don't usually bond with humans, and most people stick to birds or small animals for familiars. He knows that at a size like that, the snake is more than capable of strangling a person to death. And if that doesn't work, she's got enough venom in her fangs to finish the job easily. His mind wanders back to the time he caught Merlu out in the garden, actually seeing what she's like when she's hunting. Quinn keeps thinking back to that terrifying moment in the garden, Merlu's massive jaws snapping wide open with those fangs out, looking like a total monster compared to the chill version of her he usually sees. It's a wild contrast to the sweet pet she acts like around Melanie. He just can't shake the image of her hunting, thinking to himself about how that was a seriously shocking thing to witness. He figures Merlu has to be some kind of special mutation cooked up by the Stewart family, a familiar that's totally loyal to its master, but has enough power to wreck basically anything. Staring down at the box of shed skin, Quinn starts questioning if Melanie is actually safe, or if having a creature like that around is just a disaster waiting to happen. He gets a serious look on his face, realizing that Melanie probably doesn't even know she's basically ordered around a high-level killing machine. He shifts gears and pulls out a sheet of paper to check her work. He looks over the task he left for her while he was out of town, a project where she was supposed to take a regular magic circle and find ways to make it better. In his head, he goes over the basics, thinking about how these circles are just support tools used for all sorts of magic and alchemy. And while any beginner can pull off basic spells with a little mental imagery, he knows the advanced stuff he's teaching is on a whole different level of difficulty. Quinn goes over the basics, thinking about how chants and magic staves are really just tools to help the flow, but then there's the magic circle. He explains to the girls that this is the real deal, leading into how it's basically just a machine that sits there until someone feeds it enough mana to kick it into gear. Since Melanie doesn't have any mana of her own, Quinn figures she can draw these all day without any risk, so he tells her that he thought this would be a safe little project for her to try out. Secretly, he's thinking that if he let her stick to potions, she'd just waste all his expensive ingredients, and those bills really start to add up. Melanie gets all excited, telling him she's seen circles before but never actually got to make one herself. And then Quinn mentions he gave her something hard to test her limits, but Melanie just smiles and says she's already finished. He's caught off guard because the project was supposed to take even a decent student a solid 2 months to solve. But looking at the paper, he realizes she actually knocked the whole thing out in just a couple of days. Quinn sits back and stares at the paper, thinking her intellect and imagination are just completely out of this world. The way she handled the assignment is honestly extraordinary, especially since she somehow managed to improve the whole design using a weird method inspired by ancient magic. It's not the kind of thing you see every day, and he notices she actually boosted the attributes by focusing on the drawing tools rather than the formula itself. While that's technically a known technique, it's super rare in the modern era, and then there's the ink. He realizes the formulation she used is something even a top-tier court mage would have a hard time putting together. He's just standing there thinking about how she made it look so easy, even succeeding at a high-level task like attribute enchantment without breaking a sweat. Quinn looks off to the side, completely stunned, and decides that she really is one terrifying kid. He can't help but feel a bit overwhelmed because he actually tried to activate the magic circle behind her back to see what would happen. He didn't tell her, but even though the circle still needs some work for actual use, the sheer power of it was on a completely different level than anything he expected. He looks over at Melanie, who's just standing there looking innocent, and he seriously wonders what's going on inside her head. Sitting among his books, he admits he's at a total loss on how to handle her, mostly because she's completely oblivious to how much talent she actually has. Quinn looks at Melanie and worries that she doesn't just lack confidence in her skills. Her being way too shy is actually a pretty big problem. He remembers how Prince Kevin just laughed and called him overprotective for worrying so much, but he still can't shake the feeling because everything the girl makes is on a different level. Whether it's the potions she brews or the magic circles she draws, the stuff she creates is just way better than any magic that actually exists in the world right now. It's honestly kind of a lot to handle, and he's positive that if people found out what she could really do, it would cause a massive scene everywhere. If word gets out, Every single mage in the country is going to have their eyes on her, and that's exactly what Quinn is trying to avoid. Her talent is so huge that there's a real risk she'll end up being targeted by all kinds of people, especially since he can't rule out someone showing up to trick her and take advantage of her while she's still so clueless about her own worth. He looks up and realizes that to stop that from happening, Melanie needs to understand her own power first, so he starts thinking about setting up a magic exhibition. The scene shifts over to a fancy, decorated hall, where preparations are starting to come together for the big event. Prince Kevin listens as Quinn explains he just wants Melanie to realize how much talent she actually has. Quinn knows if her power gets out, every noble in the city will be trying to grab her. Kevin doesn't sugarcoat it, saying nobles are basically people with filthy souls. Quinn just looks on, pretty much agreeing with that dark take. The prince admits the whole situation is a massive dilemma. They need her to know her worth, but they have to keep her safe too. But then Kevin gets a look on his face like he just solved the whole thing. He realizes there's a perfect way to handle it. He suggests that they should just have her enter her work into the upcoming magic exhibition. Quinn looks back at him a bit surprised, asking for more details about what this magic exhibition actually involves. It turns out it's a huge magic competition that the kingdom hosts only once every few years, centered around a giant castle. Mages from all over get to show off their skills to a panel of judges and the king himself. The ones who do the best walk away with huge honors and a ton of prize money. The best part is that anyone can enter no matter their social status, which is why it draws in so many different mages looking for a chance. So Quinn notes that there is a very specific reason why the kingdom puts so much effort into making this tournament such a big deal. The nation's magic tech has basically hit a wall over the last few decades, and things aren't looking great because magic power is fading every year while monster numbers are blowing up. It's a total mess for everyone, and Quinn feels it the most, mentioning he spends half his life hunting those things and they're still short-staffed. So in a big push to finally break out of this slump, the government puts on this massive national sorcery exhibition, which is basically a huge showcase for the latest combat spells and magical tech to keep things moving forward. There's also the Lawrence family to consider. That's the family Emilia belongs to, the girl who stole Melanie's fiancé. So it turns out they only got their noble title because they showed off some new magic that everyone praised. Kevin smiles and asks if Quinn really thinks Melanie's new magic could be that big of a deal for the whole country, because if she actually shows up at that exhibition, there is no way she isn't going to stand out. Quinn thinks to himself that he really hopes this opportunity gives Melanie the confidence she needs, but he also knows that once she steps out there, the whole world is going to know exactly who she is. It's kind of a hassle for him, but word is already spreading that he's planning to take her on as his official apprentice, and he figures her massive talent is going to get out sooner or later anyway, so they might as well help her build up her name, setting things in motion as he taps on a magic book and decides the plan is officially a go. Quinn leaves his desk and heads through the massive library to go catch up with her and tells Melanie they need to have a serious talk, asking her to meet him over at the workshop. Melanie looks completely caught off guard, asking if he's really talking about her being in the National Sorcery Exhibition. So Quinn just stops for a second and asks if she's even heard of how the exhibition works before, since he points out that the ancient magic she's been messing with is a total game changer for history, making her way more than qualified. Melanie looks down, starting to explain that she has some major doubts about her own role in all this. Quinn watches her and realizes she just completely lacks confidence, even though Darius mentioned she specifically hates being in the public eye. Melanie tries to downplay her skills, saying the ancient magic is the only thing that's actually impressive, and she's just the person who reads it. She keeps going, saying it feels totally wrong for a person with almost no magic power to be showing off at a big exhibition like that. Quinn sighs to himself, thinking her self-doubt is totally getting in the way of her actual talent, so he calls her name to stop her. He looks her right in the eye and tells her straight up that he would never even consider taking an apprentice who didn't have what it takes. Melanie just looks back at Quinn, stunned by what he's saying. Quinn tells her he gets that she doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but the whole point is that he wants her to finally believe in herself. He explains that the only reason he's pushing her to do the exhibition is so she can get the experience she needs to feel confident. Melanie stands alone in the room, quietly thinking about the idea of actually having confidence in what she can do. Quinn points out that she really struggles with taking compliments, and then clarifies that he isn't going to force her into the exhibition if she really hates the idea, which leaves Melanie feeling totally lost. So Quinn changes the subject and suggests she should just come visit his workplace for a bit. Melanie is caught off guard by the sudden invite, and we can see she's actually pretty curious about what a court mage does. but she asks if it's even allowed for an outsider to just walk into a place like that. Quinn is glad she's interested even though the idea just popped into his head, telling her it's the perfect way to see how big the world really is, as he gives her a small, knowing smile. He shuts down her outsider comment by reminding her she's his apprentice, then suggests that becoming a royal mage herself wouldn't be a bad goal to have. Melanie's eyes light up in total shock, and she asks if he seriously thinks she could ever be a royal mage like him. Quinn just stares back at her calmly, waiting for her to respond, while Melanie starts sweating and gets completely flustered by the massive expectation he just laid on her. Melanie stands there acting all fidgety and nervous, barely able to get her words out, but she finally manages to say she'll go, as long as it's just to take a look around. Quinn doesn't miss a beat and tells her it's settled then, making it official right then and there. Fast forward a few days later, a fancy carriage is rolling down the road, and inside Melanie is looking out the window, asking Quinn if the royal sorcerer's workplace is actually outside the castle. She explains that she totally assumed they'd be getting off right in front of the main gates, but now she's realizing they're taking a detour. Quinn clears things up, telling her that while some mages do work inside the castle, most of the staff actually spend their time in the separate facilities right next to it. As the carriage keeps moving, Quinn tells her to look out the window, pointing out that the research facility is coming into view, and Melanie is just floored, shouting about how huge the building is the second she sees it. Quinn explains that since this is such an important national spot, the gear they have inside is just as good as the Magic Academy, and Melanie is totally shocked, saying she's been to the castle for parties all the time but never had any idea all of this was back here. Quinn tells her these buildings are strictly for the palace staff, so it's really no wonder that most people don't even know they're around, especially since the area is so far from the main gates that the staff usually just stick to the back entrance to get in and out. He goes on to list everything else nearby, like the dorms, training grounds, and the coliseum used for the big magic exhibition, which leaves Melanie staring out the window, admitting that the venue is seriously massive. The carriage passes the huge stone arches of the arena as they get closer. Quinn gets a bit more serious, mentioning that the whole country is putting a lot of effort into this event, and even the king is showing up to be a judge. Melanie starts to feel even more out of place the more he talks, saying that the idea of doing magic in front of a crowd that big is just crazy, and even though Quinn really wants her to compete, she can't help but feel completely overwhelmed by it all. Melanie looks pretty stressed out, thinking to herself that she's definitely just going to be a burden today, but the carriage finally pulls to a stop as Quinn announces that they've made it to their destination. Outside, a massive fancy stone building stretches out with towers and rows of windows everywhere, and Melanie steps out, looking up in awe as she realizes this is actually the place where Quinn spends his days working. She watches as other staff members walk by dressed in long, white hooded robes, heading toward the entrance. Looking around at all the people moving through the area, Melanie starts to notice something that makes her feel a bit awkward, and she points out to Quinn that literally everyone passing them is wearing the official white robe of a royal mage. Since she only planned on watching from the sidelines today, she just wore her normal clothes, but now she feels like she sticks out like a sore thumb. She slumps over, totally regretting the fact that she didn't just wear the robe the queen gave her. Seeing her look so down all of a sudden, Quinn turns back and asks her if something's wrong. Melanie brushes off Quinn's concern, telling him it's nothing while trying to act like she's not feeling out of place. She keeps moving, her boots clicking against the floor as they head deeper into the facility. Looking around at the massive hallways, Melanie mentions that while the building looked big from the outside, the inside feels just as huge, and Quinn explains that the Magic Research Institute is a massive deal, being a project the country puts a ton of work into. He goes on to say they even have a medicinal herb garden and their own training grounds on the property. And with all the different research labs lined up in the halls, there are plenty of court magicians always busy working. Melanie thinks about how cool it would be to work in a place like this, though she realizes having so many people around must be a lot to handle. But then she notices mages starting to stop and look, and she wonders if people are gathering because she's an outsider, but then she hears something that completely catches her off guard, making her shout out in shock about the queen. She starts to get really flustered and breaks into a sweat, as she realizes a massive crowd is definitely starting to form right around them. The crowd starts whispering, wondering if Melanie is actually the famous apprentice of Lady Quinn everyone's mentioned. Some people seem confused though, saying they heard she was Quinn's fiancée rather than just a student. Others point out how young she looks, doubting she even fits the part of an apprentice at a place like this. But Quinn just stays quiet, taking in all the chatter and staying cool. Suddenly Quinn turns toward the group and yells at them to get their attention, making it clear she's had enough, telling the whole lot of them that this isn't some sideshow and they need to get back to work immediately. The mages completely lose it and start scrambling away, shouting apologies and promising to get back to their posts. leaving Quinn standing there totally unfazed while Melanie is still shaking from all the sudden pressure. Once things quiet down, Melanie nervously asks why all those people were crowding around them in the first place, and Quinn just sighs, explaining that it looks like the word is finally out about Melanie being her new apprentice. Melanie is completely caught off guard, but Quinn just tells her to relax and not worry about the crowd. Even with those words, Melanie can't help but stress out, wondering if Quinn is actually some legendary figure rather than just a talented mage. Quinn is also a bit surprised herself, thinking about how much of a stir she caused just by taking on a new student. Watching Quinn walk ahead, Melanie starts to feel like she's accidentally become an apprentice to someone way more powerful than she realized. Quinn notices her trailing off and stops to look back, asking if she's feeling all right. Melanie immediately starts waving her hands around in a panic, insisting everything is fine while Quinn just looks on, totally confused. Quinn lets it slide for now, but mentions there's actually a specific spot she's been wanting to show her. Melanie looks up, curious about where Quinn could possibly be taking her after all that chaos. As they reach a set of large, fancy doors, Melanie realizes this must be the place Quinn was talking about. She stares at the building in awe, realizing they've arrived at the magic research lab and asking if this is really it. The sign on the door confirms they've finally reached the ancient magic research lab. As they walk through the grand, quiet hallway, Melanie gets curious and asks if there are actually other people who specialize in this kind of magic. Quinn looks back and admits there are a few, though she reminds Melanie that it's a really small group. She explains that ancient languages are a total pain to analyze, which is why most mages stay away from it, leading to the lab almost shutting down because they lose people every year. They reach the main room and Quinn calls out to let whoever is inside know they're coming in, but somebody inside screams about being in the middle of an alchemy session, just as a heavy staff comes flying straight at Quinn's face. The person inside just says whoops like it's no big deal, while Quinn reaches up and catches the weapon out of the air with one hand. Quinn doesn't even look rattled, she just tells the guy Ollie that throwing staves at people's heads is a pretty dangerous habit to have. A short old man with a huge white beard turns around, acting surprised to see young Quinn showing up at the lab since she's rarely around. Quinn just stands there holding the staff, waiting for him to settle down so they can actually get to work. Quinn looks over at the old man and tells him she's actually there because she has some business to take care of, but before she can finish, someone in the back of the lab yells out, asking if they just heard the name Lord Quinn. There's a sudden loud crash as a person comes sprinting out from behind the shelves, knocking over glass bottles and gear along the way, and it turns out to be a young researcher who looks totally obsessed, staring at Quinn with literal hearts floating around his head. Ollie gets annoyed and barks at the kid to watch where he's going so he doesn't break everything in the room, but the guy doesn't seem to hear him at all, leaving Quinn standing there feeling pretty awkward as he just stares her down. She tries to get his attention by asking if he can even hear her voice right now, while the rookie just clutches his hands together and blushes, panicking to himself about how the real Quinn Blanchett is actually standing right in front of him. Quinn takes a second to look at him and realizes he's the new rookie they hired for the lab, though the kid is way too far gone to be professional, just looking at her like she's a total idol. The rookie researcher introduces himself as Dino with way too much energy, while Quinn just stands there looking completely drained. She tries to keep it professional and asks if he was actually assigned to this lab, but Dino just smiles and says his training period just wrapped up, so he's just touring the different divisions for now. He mentions being there by total luck, since his real goal is to join the same elite magic regiment Quinn is in. A big bearded guy named Burley steps up and tells the kid he's got 100 years to go before he's ready for an elite group, and Ollie speaks up from the back, saying that Burley is 100% right about the kid being too green. Dino just takes a deep breath and keeps his cool, then he fires right back, saying he doesn't want to hear that from guys who haven't produced any results in years. Burley completely loses it and starts yelling about how the youth today have zero respect for their elders, which makes Quinn turn to Melanie with a tired look, apologizing because the people in this place are just a bit too much to handle. Quinn just lets out a long, tired sigh. Ollie notices something and asks Quinn if there's someone standing behind her, noticing Melanie hiding back there. Quinn introduces Melanie as her apprentice who's just there to watch for the day, while Melanie politely says hi and apologizes for the interruption. Pointing over at Burley and Dino, Quinn explains that these are the guys who have been stuck in this lab researching ancient magic for years. Melanie looks at them and realizes their robes are completely trashed, way worse than any normal mage she's seen before. She gives them her name again and says sorry for getting in the way of their research, but Ollie admits he's shocked because he never thought a stubborn person like Quinn would actually take on a young girl as an apprentice. Burley towers over her and calls her a kid, asking for her age, which makes Melanie nervously admit she's only 17. Dino completely loses it when he hears that, realizing this girl is actually 3 years younger than him. He stares her down with a doubtful look, saying he doesn't see how someone that young could have enough talent to be Quinn's apprentice. Melanie tells Dino he doesn't have to be so mean about it, then asks if he's just acting like this because he's a huge fan of Quinn. Quinn cuts in to explain that since Melanie's into ancient magic, she thought this lab would be the best place for her to learn. Burley gets all hyped up hearing she's a specialist, saying she must be a total pro if Quinn actually took her on. He tells her to make herself at home and check out the place, since they're pretty proud of what they've built here. Melanie gives him a big smile and says thanks, really excited to finally get a look at everything. Quinn plays it down saying the room is kind of small, but Melanie just stands there taking it all in and saying how awesome it is. She starts looking at the shelves, spotting all these old-school tools and stuffed monsters she's never seen before, and it hits her that the whole vibe of the room reminds her a lot of the lab back at her parents' place. She notices a huge stash of magic inks and mentions how crazy it is that they have so many different kinds, which makes Ollie look pretty smug, as he tells her that the ink collection is basically his favorite thing in the world. Ollie points out his collection, mentioning he bought inks from all over the world, including stuff from peddlers and batches he cooked up himself. He shows her a specific bottle made from the horns and fangs of a creature called a Fezra, a rare piece that took him decades to finish, and Melanie is totally hooked, asking if that's the lesser dragon species since she's never actually seen one in person before. She looks over the shelves, thinking about how rare it is to find mages who still make their own ink like this, but Quinn just shrugs it off, telling Ollie he's got a great collection even if he doesn't have much else going for him. Ollie snaps back immediately, demanding to know what she means by that nothing else comment. Then Dino jumps in to side with Quinn, telling the old guy that fancy materials are useless if they aren't actually producing any results. This just makes Ollie even angrier. He starts waving his staff around and complaining that even the rookie is talking trash now. While they argue, Melanie wanders off and spots something interesting, asking if she's looking at a magic circle written in ancient script, which is when Burley suddenly remembers something and turns around, accidentally giving her a bit of a scare. Burley shows Melanie a complex magic circle and asks if she has any idea what kind of spell it actually is, leading Melanie to lean in and look closely, picking out specific words for binding and capture while wondering if the spell is meant for chains. She finally looks up and asks if the circle is designed to catch and restrain things, which leaves Burley standing there in total shock. Burley just stares at her for a second before confirming that she's 100% right about the circle's purpose, and then he suddenly stops, asking her if she can actually read ancient script. Melanie gets a bit shy and tells him she can manage it more or less. The big guy loses it and shouts about how wonderful this is, making Melanie jump because he's so loud and excited. He can't believe she managed to decipher a circle like that in just one shot without any help at all. So Burley points right at her and tells her she's a straight-up genius, which catches the attention of Ollie, who yells out to ask if that's really true since that specific circle took their entire team a whole year to figure out. Burley just grins and confirms it, telling the old man that Melanie saw through the whole thing and identified it as a binding circle in a single glance. Ollie is completely blown away and shouts about how incredible it is that he just stands there staring at her with wide eyes, looking totally stunned. Then he asks Melanie if she can figure out the reason why the magic circle won't activate, which catches her off guard, making her repeat the question back to him in surprise. Ollie explains that he copied the symbols perfectly from the old texts, but no matter how much mana he pours in, it won't budge. He's basically at his wit's end. While Burley feels the pressure of everyone watching them so closely, Melanie decides she has to try one more time even if she isn't feeling super confident. She looks up at the massive magic circle again, studying every detail of the lines, and realizes that even though the drawing itself looks 100% correct, there's still something keeping it from working. Dino just laughs the whole thing off, saying it's impossible for her to fix since the experts worked on it for years and still couldn't crack it. He keeps going, telling her that being able to read a few old letters doesn't mean she's actually smart enough to solve a puzzle this big. Dino sighs and looks pretty annoyed, asking the others if they aren't expecting way too much from Melanie, but Burley immediately shuts him down, yelling that he can't even read ancient script himself. Dino acts all offended, saying that's a low blow since he's still just a student. Quinn ignores the bickering and looks straight at Melanie, asking her if she has any actual ideas, which completely catches Melanie off guard, making her stare back at Quinn in total surprise. Melanie gets her thoughts together and says that if the circle is drawn perfectly, the only other problem could be a lack of mana, and Quinn just stands there looking stunned, repeating the word mana like she can't believe it. Melanie keeps going, explaining that circles need mana to work, but this one is probably failing because the supply is just too low. She brings up a theory that ancient mages were way more powerful than anyone alive today, meaning the circle likely needs that same ancient level of power to actually turn on. The researchers suddenly scream that she's found the answer, which is so loud it nearly makes Melanie jump out of her skin. Ollie gets all fired up and tells Barney that the theory Melanie just came up with is actually possible, and Burley is right there with him, saying it's definitely worth a shot. Ollie suggests they try channeling their mana together while matching the same mental image, so Burley adds that they'll need to sync up their chanting perfectly to make it work. Then Ollie mentions using some high-grade magic ink to give the circle an extra mana boost, making the whole group start yelling about how great the idea is and how they need to get started right now. As the researchers lose their minds in the background, Melanie looks pretty worried and calls out to Quinn, asking her if she said something she wasn't supposed to say. Quinn stays cool and tells her it's fine, saying she's the one who asked for her input and Melanie has nothing to worry about. Melanie watches the chaos and thinks about how this has turned into a massive scene, and she's not really sure what to do next. But then Dino leans in and asks her who she actually is. Melanie just stands there looking completely lost after Dino's sudden question, and Dino keeps going, pointing out that she can read ancient script and knows way too much about magic to be some random person, so he asks what family she's actually from. Melanie gets a bit flustered and hesitates for a second before she finally tells him she's from the House of Stewart, which causes Dino to absolutely lose it, yelling out the family name in total shock. His reaction jump scares her a bit, but she quickly nods and confirms that he heard her right. Dino just stares at her, sweating and looking like his whole world just got turned upside down, and Melanie watches him go quiet, eventually calling out his name to see if he's even still there. But Dino starts shaking like a leaf, thinking to himself that if she's a Stewart, she has to be related to Henrik and Agnes. But Melanie doesn't notice he's scared and gets excited, asking if he knows her siblings and if they were friends at the academy. Before she can say anything else, Dino suddenly snaps and grabs her by the shoulders. Dino gets super worked up, yelling that Melanie's siblings caused him nothing but trouble back at the academy, which totally catches Melanie off guard as she asks what he means by that. But he just tells her to listen to his story. It turns out Dino was always called a prodigy as a kid and showed up to the academy with massive expectations from his family, but that all went south the second he realized Henrik was in his year. Henrik took first place in every single lecture and exam, leaving Dino stuck at number 2 and ruining his chance at a perfect school life. Even when it came to the younger sister, Agnes, things weren't any better. Dino never won a single match during the annual tournaments, and he can still see the smug look of victory on Henrik's face from back then. Thinking about it makes him bitter, complaining that Henrik was so arrogant and looked down on him just for being talented. Burley isn't having any of it though, calling the whole story a bunch of sore loser talk, and Ollie backs him up, saying it really just comes down to Dino not having the skill to keep up. Dino gets defensive, telling Ollie that he only thinks that way because he doesn't know how the Stewart siblings really are, and he goes on about how he's actually talented enough to have passed the court mage exam at 18, but those siblings were the only people he could never beat. He even begs Ollie for some sympathy for being stuck with such freakish geniuses. Melanie starts feeling pretty awkward about the whole thing, apologizing because it sounds like her brothers caused him a lot of trouble. Dino just groans, saying they honestly made his life a total nightmare back then, but then he realizes something. He tells Melanie he doesn't remember seeing her at the academy, even though she should have been there. Melanie looks a bit nervous as she admits that she didn't actually go to that school at all, making Dino completely freak out. He asks her how she even managed to learn magic and ancient scripts without going to classes. She explains that while her family taught her the basics, she mostly studied the difficult ancient languages and magic circles on her own. Hearing that just makes Dino lose it even more, yelling about why she would ever try to learn something that hard by herself. Melanie feels the pressure of the offer, but she nervously admits that she was actually born with almost zero magical power, which completely shocks Burley and Dino. Burley yells out, unable to believe a daughter of the famous Stewart family has no mana. He keeps shouting, asking if she's for real and complaining that their research is going to be a total mess if she can't use magic. Quinn steps in, looking pretty annoyed as she tells them to stop talking like she's there for them. Melanie is her apprentice, not a research assistant. Ollie tries to play it cool, saying that since Quinn brought her along she must have planned on letting her help out, but Quinn shuts that down fast. She explains she only brought Melanie to see the facility for her future career. And besides, she isn't an official court mage yet. Burley doesn't care about the titles or the rules, yelling that just being able to read those ancient scripts is more than enough talent for him. Ollie backs him up instantly, claiming that having someone like her around is exactly what they need to jumpstart their stuck research project. So Quinn tries to get them to settle down again, repeating that Melanie literally doesn't have the mana required to actually perform magic. The researchers won't take no for an answer, begging Melanie to join their lab because her knowledge is so crazy, leaving Quinn just trying to get a word in. Melanie stands alone outside, thinking about how that whole tour was way more exhausting than she expected, and Quinn tells her to stay put and not move an inch while she goes off to a business meeting, complaining that being out in public is just too tiring, so Melanie waits right where she was told. Inside the lab, Burley and Ollie are still shouting about their research, and the noise of them losing it makes Melanie look pretty stressed as she starts thinking about what it would actually be like to have a real job as a royal court mage. She remembers how happy she was when Quinn first asked if she was interested, especially since it felt like a dream she wasn't even allowed to have. But now that she's actually seen the facility and the people there, she tells Quinn she realizes just how far out of reach that world is for her. She looks at the magic circles and thinks about how this place is only for the best mages to work on their skills every day. And even though Ollie and the guys tried to hire her, it feels impossible because you need actual magic to even do the research, and she basically has zero power. Thinking back on everything Dino and the other researchers said, it really made Melanie realize just how much of a total legend Quinn is to every single person in this kingdom. Melanie looks pretty down, thinking it was a mistake to even dream about being Quinn's apprentice when she's so far behind everyone else. But as she stands there, a voice from across the courtyard calls out her name, wondering if that's actually her. Melanie freezes the second she hears those footsteps, recognizing that voice instantly. Her eyes go wide and she starts breaking into a cold sweat while a woman with a smug look on her face and a fancy lace choker stops right in front of her. She takes one last slow step forward, clicking her heels on the ground. The girl laughs a bit and says it's been a really long time since they last saw each other. Melanie can't believe who she's looking at and asks what in the world Emilia is doing there, but Emilia just smirks and says she should be asking the same thing, explaining she's only there to sign up for the upcoming magic exhibition. Melanie is completely floored by the news, asking for clarification if Emilia is actually going to be a part of the exhibition. Emilia smiles and says that as the fiancée of the Olsen family, this exhibition is the perfect chance to show off her skills. Melanie realizes the engagement to Julian is finally official, seeing them standing together as a couple, which makes her call out Emilia's name, asking how she can be so calm about all of this. Melanie remembers that Julian was her fiancé first, and it's hard to just watch him with someone else, especially when she thinks that if Emilia actually liked him, she should have just said something before the engagement was even broken. Looking at her, Melanie wonders if she was the only one who actually thought they were friends this whole time. She has so many questions she wants to ask her former friend, but as she looks down, Melanie finds herself completely stuck, unable to get even a single word out. Emilia calls her a gloomy girl as usual and says she's going to prove she's way better than Melanie and the rest of the Stewart family. Then she takes a final jab, asking why someone with absolutely no magic talent is even standing in front of the research institute. Melanie is completely caught off guard. She starts sweating and stammers, asking if they're really talking about her and Lord Quinn. Emilia just narrows her eyes, realizing that all those rumors she heard were actually true. She says she heard the news about Melanie being engaged to Quinn Blanchett, and then she starts mocking her, saying it's crazy how fast Melanie found a replacement after getting dumped by Julian, and that the Stewart family's pull in high society is pretty impressive. Emilia keeps going, asking if Melanie was actually just kicked out of her old life because she's totally useless. She wonders how she could even think of going from Julian straight to someone like Lord Quinn with a mean look on her face. She says Melanie just jumps from one target to the next, like she's some kind of parasite. Melanie feels like everything is falling apart. She can't believe how bad things are getting. Emilia tells her she's just stating the facts and that Melanie standing by Lady Quinn's side is just wrong, which leaves Melanie looking down with tears in her eyes. She tries to say it's true but can't even find the words to defend herself. Quinn stands his ground and tells her that she's the one who doesn't get what's going on here, but suddenly Emilia yells out Quinn's name, catching everyone's attention right away. Melanie is completely stunned. She never actually thought Quinn would show up to back her up like this. Quinn looks over at the other girl with a cold expression and asks who she even is, so Emilia puts on a fake smile and introduces herself, making sure to mention she's joining the Olsen family soon. Quinn realizes who he's talking to, the lady who went and stole Melanie's fiancé away from her. Emilia acts offended, saying stole is a harsh word and that Melanie simply wasn't good enough for him anyway, and Melanie just looks at the ground, feeling defeated as she says she can't really argue with that. Quinn watches her closely for a second before telling Emilia that she might actually be right about that, which gives Emilia a huge, smug look on her face like she just won the whole argument. Quinn doesn't hold back, telling everyone straight up that Melanie is way too good for the Duke's family, and Emilia completely loses it, getting all red in the face and demanding to know what he's even talking about. He keeps his cool and says he means exactly what he said, pointing out that Melanie has an insane talent for magic. Someone in the crowd tries to shut him down, yelling that the girl doesn't even have a drop of magic in her, so Quinn just smirks and explains that even without raw power, she's got a gift for restoring ancient magic. Emilia looks totally lost, just repeating the words ancient magic like she's never heard of it before. Quinn doubles down and lets everyone know that Melanie can actually read ancient texts, which makes Emilia go pale as she says there's no way that's true, while Melanie just stands there feeling the pressure. Quinn puts a hand on her and tells the room that's why he made her his apprentice. He knows people think he only engaged her for her family name, but he looks down at her and says the truth is he just wants Melanie for who she is. Melanie looks totally stunned, wondering if Quinn really just recognized her worth in front of everyone. Quinn decides he's done with the drama, telling the crowd that arguing is a waste of time before telling Melanie it's time to go. She quickly agrees and follows him out, leaving the party behind. Moving on, they head back to Quinn's massive estate after finishing up their stop at the magic lab, and Melanie can't stop thinking about how Quinn told her she must be tired and should get some good rest. Later that night, she's tucked into her big bed. But sleep isn't coming easy because she keeps replaying the moment Quinn looked right at her and saw her for who she really is. She wonders if he was just saying those things to cover for her in a bad situation, but either way she can't help feeling happy. She starts blushing like crazy, not even knowing what to do with herself since she's so overwhelmed, and then tears start hitting her eyes just from the simple fact that Quinn finally acknowledged her. Melanie is wide awake in bed, finally admitting to herself that she's fallen for Quinn. It explains why her heart won't stop racing, and she realizes she never felt anything like this back when she was with Julian. Looking back, she just can't get the image of Quinn's face out of her head, so she wonders if this really is love, and if she wants to stay by his side forever. The more she thinks about it, the more she wants to become someone who is actually worthy of him. She imagines herself standing confidently next to him, realizing she needs to change her mindset if she's going to make that happen. The room is quiet as she sits there alone in the dark, still trying to figure out how she's supposed to build up that kind of confidence. She goes quiet for a minute just thinking through her options, until it finally clicks. She remembers the magic exhibition is coming up and that might be her shot. Melanie thinks back to how she turned down a suggestion just the other day, but she realizes that if she actually takes part in the event, people might finally start respecting her. She knows even Emilia is entering the upcoming magic exhibition just to get the Olsen family's approval. And that's enough to make Melanie realize she has to step up and do it too. The sun is out over the estate while everything stays quiet outside. Melanie sits down with Quinn and straight up tells him she wants to be in the magic exhibition. Quinn looks up from his book, a bit surprised, and asks what brought this change on so suddenly. Melanie starts to get a little nervous, asking him if it's actually not allowed for her to join, so Quinn gives her a smile and says he's just glad she's motivated, promising he'll be cheering her on. Melanie gets super excited and tells him she's really looking forward to working together on this. Right after they talked, the work for the magic exhibition finally gets moving. Melanie spends her time buried in books, wondering what kind of magic would actually be best to show off. She figures that since the venue is huge, everyone is going to want to see something flashy and cool, so Quinn points out that most of the people there will probably just be showing off combat magic. Melanie starts to feel the pressure, realizing she can't think of a single thing to do with monster fighting magic. She looks at her notes, thinking about how all she can really do is make potions and draw magic circles, but even then, she doesn't have nearly enough mana to actually make a magic circle work. She looks at Quinn and asks if it would work if she just drew the circle and let him be the one to present it. Quinn tells her that would just make people think she didn't even make it, and honestly, he's not wrong. He looks at her and asks if there's anything at all she can demonstrate that doesn't require her to use mana. Quinn brings up a new idea, asking if she could just use a tool that works like attack magic. He explains that hunters use things like sleeping gas or paralyzing potions on monsters all the time. He figures if they can find something like that in ancient magic, they can just build it themselves. Melanie starts to see his point, realizing they actually have a lot of different paths they could take, so Quinn suggests they narrow it down to a few good choices, and Melanie is totally on board, but then he has to apologize, explaining he's been sent on a long expedition and can't help her search. Since it's too much work for her to do alone, he thinks they should ask Ollie and the magic lab team, though Melanie isn't so sure, wondering if those guys will even want to help her out. Quinn tells her not to worry because those two have been dying to get her into their lab anyway, so he's just going to take advantage of that, even if Melanie looks a little weirded out by the plan. Melanie heads over to the ancient magic research lab to start working, but Dino isn't exactly thrilled, sighing because he really wanted to work with Quinn and only got her student. Melanie feels pretty bad about it and apologizes for being the only one there, though someone in the back loses it, yelling at Dino to learn how to actually read the ancient scripts before he starts complaining. Dino brushes it off, realizing that staying close to Melanie is probably his best shot at getting to Quinn later, so he welcomes her. Melanie gives him a nice smile and says she's looking forward to working together, But then Ollie pipes up, telling her he'd be even happier if she'd help them out with their own research projects. She has to turn him down though, explaining that Quinn strictly told her not to do any research outside of the exhibition. So the old guy tries to play it cool, asking if she could just help him out in secret without anyone knowing. Dino kills the idea right away, pointing out that if they suddenly get way better at translating, everyone is going to catch on instantly. Dino lets out a little groan while Melanie holds her hands together, apologizing for having to lean on them so much, but Burley just brushes it off, asking her if her current research is going to involve ancient magic like before. He tells her he's actually fine with the arrangement, as long as he gets to see whatever she's cooking up from a close distance. Melanie lights up with a huge smile and thanks him for being so cool about it, since she was honestly worried she wouldn't be accepted by the team on her own, so she's really relieved. Dino finally gets down to business, asking her what she's actually planning to present at the magic exhibition. So Melanie explains that since she doesn't have any mana to cast attack spells, she has to take a different approach. She opens up her notes to show them a diagram, saying she's thinking of building a specific magic item. The two older guys lean in, looking super serious at her notes. Dino just looks at the page with a totally blank face, asking what the writing even says because it's way over his head. Melanie explains that the project she's working on is actually restraints for catching monsters. She tells them it's based on that magic circle they saw recently, plus some stuff she found in an old book. Burley admits she found something pretty cool, while Dino asks her what kind of materials they're going to need. Melanie slides a piece of paper over to them, telling the guys that she's already got the list ready. Dino takes one look at it and asks her how much she's planning to blow on a single exhibition, leaving Melanie totally confused, while he explains that the cost of these materials would literally bankrupt the entire country. She slumps over, looking pretty discouraged as she asks if that means they can't do it. The three guys just stand there looking completely worn out by the whole situation. Ollie eventually speaks up, suggesting that maybe they should check in with Quinn about all of this. But Melanie points out that Quinn is way too busy with work and probably off on another expedition. Dino explains that Quinn is actually out hunting monsters specifically to use in the upcoming exhibition, which makes Ollie curious about where exactly they're planning to go for the hunt. Dino mentions it's the Tyres volcano region, and Melanie is just shocked he's even keeping track of Quinn's schedule like that. But she's mostly worried because she's heard that the volcano is crawling with some really ferocious monsters. Burley isn't stressed at all though, just casually saying that Quinn should be totally fine, and Dino agrees, smiling as he says it's Master Quinn they're talking about after all. Melanie just stands there for a second completely lost as to why they're both so relaxed about the whole thing. She looks away, thinking that even if everyone else is cool with it, she still has her doubts because even if Quinn has done this a million times before, there's always a chance she could get hurt. So Melanie has a sudden realization and decides she's going to make a good luck charm to keep Quinn safe. Melanie starts flipping through the pages of a thick book as she looks for something specific. Dino is totally caught off guard by her energy and asks what's going on all of a sudden. Melanie looks up with a big smile and tells him she's figured it out, she's going to make a good luck charm. Dino just stares at her, sounding pretty confused as he repeats the word charm back to her. Melanie holds the book out and asks him to take a look, but Dino just yells that he already told her he can't read the text. Burley steps in to help and looks at the page, noting that the charm is meant to protect the person wearing it from attacks. He keeps reading and asks what kind of ingredients they're going to need to pull this off, so Melanie starts listing them out, mentioning Machia sprouts, Bercura fruit, and something called Arganzorla rock. She gets a bit serious as she realizes the first two ingredients are actually pretty rare these days, but she finds a note saying they can just use Yanadori leaves instead of Matias buds because they work the exact same way. Melanie keeps looking through the book and suggests they could swap the Brucra fruit for Lula wood chips instead. Dino thinks about it and says the wood chips are a little pricey, but they can still make it work with their budget. Ollie chimes in saying they won't really know if it works until they try, but the idea sounds solid to him. Burley looks ready to go and tells the group that since they've made a decision, they should start on it right now, so Melanie gives a little nod and tells them she is really counting on their help to get this done. The story jumps ahead a few days to Quinn's massive estate, where things seem pretty quiet and peaceful until Darius shows up with a smile and asks Melanie how she's been holding up lately. Melanie looks happy to see a familiar face and tells her uncle that it's been quite a while since they last talked. Darius mentions he was actually surprised she came to visit so out of the blue and asks if everything is okay, but he quickly follows up by saying he just wanted to see if she was settling in, and he's relieved to see her doing so well. Melanie smiles as she talks to her uncle, telling him that everyone at the estate has been treating her really well lately. Darius looks happy to hear it and asks her how things have been going specifically with Quinn. Melanie gets all excited, explaining that Quinn has been teaching her a ton and even lets her into his private workspace now, and Darius just laughs, telling her that it definitely sounds like she is doing a great job over there. Melanie catches herself and apologizes for getting so carried away talking about work, but Darius brushes it off, saying he's just genuinely happy to see her doing so well for herself. He gets comfortable on the couch and asks her if Quinn is busy working at the moment. Melanie mentions that Quinn is tied up with preparations for the monster hunt at the next magic exhibition. Darius realizes the event is coming up soon and says he'll be a judge, then asks if she's actually participating too. Melanie looks pretty determined and says she is, because she really wants to get some achievements under her belt. Darius notices a shift in the conversation and asks if something happened. Melanie looks him right in the eye, saying she just wants to be worthy of Quinn, even if it's only a little. Darius can't help but smile at that, telling her she's definitely changed from how she used to be. Melanie looks pretty surprised by the comment and asks if she really has. Darius explains that people always say love changes a woman, and it looks like that's exactly what's happening with her. Melanie starts blushing like crazy and starts shouting, asking her uncle what he is even talking about. He just mentions he's happy they're getting along, especially since he was worried Quinn would just keep the engagement as a business deal, but Melanie feels a wave of relief, thinking he actually figured out the engagement was a total sham. She gets curious about his connection to him and asks what he meant by knowing Quinn so well. Darius gets a bit of a look in his eyes, simply saying he's known the guy since he was just a kid. Darius looks pretty confident as he mentions he can usually guess what Quinn is going to do. And Melanie sits there quietly, thinking about how the only real info she has is that Quinn used to be her uncle's student. She looks up at him with a curious face and asks if he wouldn't mind telling her a bit more about the guy. Darius is totally fine with that and says he'll share a few things about him while the two of them relax inside the massive estate, surrounded by trees. Melanie brings up that she heard Quinn was his student and asks if he was already doing big things even back then. Darius tells her he definitely was, calling him a total prodigy whose talent was spotted early on, just like her siblings. And it turns out he actually got into the Magic Academy at just 6 years old, staying there until he passed the court mage exam at 15. Melanie is completely shocked to hear he started at 6, thinking about how crazy that is even if the school doesn't have an age limit. Darius adds that Quinn grew up in a rural area far from the capital, but he eventually left his parents to come to the city all on his own. Darius continues the story, mentioning how Quinn had a rough time fitting in back then because of his age. He says that Quinn's talent was so huge it just made everyone around him jealous. And because of that, the guy basically stopped trying with people and just buried himself in his magic books. He completely shut everyone out, just spent all his time alone in the corner of the classroom focused on his research. Darius looks over at Melanie and asks if that story sounds a little familiar to her. She just says Quinn's name quietly to herself and sits there in silence for a second, really letting the story sink in. She starts thinking about how Quinn is actually just like her, and it really hurts her heart to think about what he went through as a kid. Darius smiles and adds that even though he's an adult now, Quinn hasn't changed all that much, though he's finally learned to be a bit more social. The thing is, he was still pretty stuck in his ways, so Darius had been bugging him to take on an apprentice for a long time, but Quinn always turned him down. That's why Darius was so surprised when Quinn suddenly decided he wanted to take her on as his student. Darius smiles at Melanie and tells her she's a special case, while he explains that he only suggested the engagement because he wanted the two of them to finally open up to someone. He then asks if she's okay with continuing to support Quinn. Melanie looks a bit unsure and wonders how she can actually help him when she feels like she hasn't done anything yet. Darius just tells her not to overthink things and that just being herself is more than enough. Moving on, Darius mentions there's one more thing he needs to ask her, and he pulls out a heavy book, explaining that his sisters wanted his help, but he'd rather have Melanie decipher this ancient family document instead. Melanie gives him a big smile and says she's happy to do anything she can to help out. A few days go by after her uncle's visit, and Melanie holds up a small, glowing orb. She says it's just a prototype, but she managed to finish making the protective charm just in time. She looks pretty happy with herself, thinking that as long as the magic actually works, it's good enough for her. Melanie knows she has to hurry up and get the charm to Quinn, so she checks to see where his room is and finds out he's actually working at the research facility today. She heads over there right away, and after knocking, a voice tells her to come in. She opens the door and starts to introduce herself, but stops when she sees a super good-looking guy sitting there looking all sparkly. The guy asks if she's Quinn's fiancé, and Melanie can only manage to tell him that he's right. He gives her a big smile and says he knew it, introducing himself as a friend of Quinn's. Melanie is completely blown away and blurts out Sir Quinn's, like she can't believe it, making the guy laugh. He asks if it's really that shocking that Quinn actually has friends, leaving her struggling to find an answer. Moving on, he explains that Quinn had to step away for a bit to talk to the vice commander, so she should just wait here for him. Melanie stays, but she's feeling pretty awkward. She thinks leaving would be rude, but sitting there with this guy is a lot. Melanie is sitting there feeling super tense and unable to relax, while Prince Kevin mentions that he's already heard all about her from Quinn. He goes on to say he's surprised Quinn actually got such a cute girl to be his fiancée, then asks what it's like living in the same mansion as him. This totally catches Melanie off guard. She starts blushing and gets all flustered, struggling to even come up with an answer. Kevin just laughs it off and says he was being a bit mean with that question, noting he knows the engagement was just a requirement for her apprenticeship. Melanie looks down and admits that the whole arrangement was definitely a huge surprise to her when it first happened, and Kevin nods, saying it was hard for him to believe Quinn would go through so much trouble just to bring someone on as a student. He looks at her and says her talent is actually incredible, especially since she can read ancient scripts and bring that old magic back to life. But then he shifts the topic, leaning in a bit to ask what Quinn really thinks about her as a person. The question leaves her completely stunned. She just stands there for a second with a blank look on her face, but she eventually smiles and says she's just really grateful that Quinn was willing to take her in as his apprentice. Melanie thinks about how Master Quinn has been so kind to her despite her lack of experience. She really wants to work hard and become an apprentice who lives up to all his expectations. Kevin laughs and apologizes for being rude, saying he was just acting out of concern as a friend, but it looks like he didn't have anything to worry about after all. Melanie sits there on the sofa, realizing that he was just showing genuine concern for Quinn this whole time. It catches her off guard. But Kevin keeps going, explaining that Quinn can be a pretty difficult guy because being a total genius usually makes him act a bit distant. He crosses his arms and mentions how stubborn Quinn is and how he takes everything way too seriously. If he gets an order, he's going to try and finish it no matter how crazy the job actually is. He points out that this expedition is the perfect example since it should have had a way bigger team, but Quinn just did what the higher-ups told him. He looks a bit troubled, wondering what Quinn will do if something actually goes wrong, especially since he's warned him plenty of times but Quinn just never listens. Melanie watches him and realizes this guy cares about Quinn just as much as her uncle does, which makes her see him in a different light. Kevin smiles again, adding that the people in charge really do just pile all the work onto Quinn. Melanie can't help but wonder how he knows so much about the messy politics at the palace, but he just tells her that knowing she's there to look out for Quinn actually gives him a bit of peace of mind. Melanie smiles and clasps her hands together, telling Kevin she's just really happy that Quinn has such a good friend looking out for him. It's a big relief to her. Kevin calls her a kind kid and then notices something in her hand, asking what she's got there. Melanie looks a bit surprised and explains it's actually an amulet she put together for Quinn. Kevin gets interested and asks if he can take a closer look at it. She shows him the small orb, explaining that it's a protection charm meant to shield the person carrying it from getting hurt, though it only works one time. Kevin asks if she used those ancient magic techniques he's heard about. Melanie says she did, but the real materials were way too expensive, so she had to find some cheaper alternatives to make it work. Because she had to swap things out, she admits the power probably isn't as strong as the original version would have been. She looks down, saying Quinn might not even need something like this, but since she heard the expedition is heading to a volcano, she just really wanted to help out. A bit of doubt creeps in and she starts wondering if she was being a little too pushy by making it. Kevin just gives her a big smile and tells her not to worry, because he's totally sure Quinn is going to appreciate the thought. Just then the door swings open and Quinn walks in, looking pretty surprised to see Melanie sitting there in his room. Melanie looks at Kevin and realizes that even though he acts so casual, he's actually the first prince of the whole kingdom. Kevin catches her vibe and jokes that saying despite how he looks is actually pretty rude, you know. Melanie just stands there totally frozen, worrying to herself that she might have accidentally said something disrespectful to royalty. Kevin ignores her panic and tells them he really liked their little chat, but it's finally time for him to head out. He gives a polite wave and says goodbye to Melanie, telling her he'll see her around later on. Melanie just makes a tiny startled noise as he walks away, leaving her alone with Quinn. Quinn sits there on the couch with his arms crossed, looking pretty serious as he asks what they were talking about and if Kevin said anything weird to her. Seeing his face, Melanie gets a bit nervous and asks if he's mad, trying to explain that it was honestly just small talk. Quinn doesn't seem convinced and mutters that they looked way too chummy for it to be just a normal conversation. Melanie starts shaking and immediately shouts no, clearly feeling the heat from Quinn's sudden protective streak. Melanie changes the subject and tells Quinn she has a gift for him. Reaching into her bag, Quinn takes the small object from her and asks what it is. Looking it over in his hand, Melanie shyly explains that it's a protective charm she put together herself. Quinn assumes it's her project for the upcoming exhibition and asks if she finished it that quickly. Melanie gets a bit flustered and says no, it's just a prototype she made specifically for him. She starts talking fast, insisting she knows he's powerful and doesn't doubt his skills, but she wanted him to have it just in case. She just wanted something to help pray for his safe return home. When Quinn doesn't say anything, Melanie starts to worry she's being a bother, getting nervous because he's staying so quiet. But Quinn eventually speaks up and says he was just thinking about how long it's been since anyone genuinely worried about him, leaving Melanie just staring at him, totally caught off guard by what he just said. Quinn looks genuinely touched by the gesture, blushing as he quietly tells Melanie thank you, but Melanie notices his ear is turning bright red and asks him if he's doing okay. She just stands there with a massive blush on her face. Eventually, she tells him she's glad he likes it and promises to work her hardest on the exhibition. She says she wants to be worthy of staying by his side, and Quinn just gives her a small, confident smile and tells her she'll be totally fine. A few days go by after Quinn heads out on his expedition, making sure to take her charm with him. Melanie spends her time buried in work at the shop, getting so focused she doesn't even notice the sun going down. She finally hits a wall and passes out right on top of her papers, sleeping through the night until the door slowly creaks open and a tall figure stands in the entrance. Melanie opens one eye, still half asleep, and groggily asks if that's Master Quinn who just walked in. Melanie's eyes go wide as she sees a figure in the doorway and whispers his name. Quinn stands there looking calm as she quietly tells him welcome back. He doesn't say a word yet, just starts walking over toward the desk where she's resting. He leans in close and tells her he's finally home, and Melanie can't help but notice how gentle he sounds. She's convinced this is all a dream because of how much she's missed him. Thinking she's just asleep, she figures it's fine to say something a little more honest than she usually would, so she tells him straight up that she was really lonely while he was away. She looks up and asks if he felt the same way, and Quinn just stares back for a second before he breaks into a smile and admits he's been wanting to see her just as much. Melanie starts blushing like crazy, thinking this is the best dream ever and feeling totally happy. Quinn leans over the desk and tells Melanie he's sure he missed her 100 times more than she missed him. He reaches out toward her, and Melanie mentions how bold he's being today, admitting it's really flustering her. He asks if he's actually bothering her, but she just looks up at him with this totally dazed expression. So Quinn gets serious and tells her it's not that at all. He just really regrets calling their deal a temporary engagement. Melanie's eyes go wide and she repeats the word regret, feeling completely caught off guard by what he's saying. Quinn looks away for a second and admits that she's becoming more and more precious to him, making Melanie whisper the word back to herself in disbelief, while Quinn just quietly confirms that he means it. She starts blushing and giggling, telling him she's so happy because they actually feel the exact same way. She tries to keep the conversation going and keep talking to him, but her mind starts to wander, and she realizes she can't hold out much longer because her eyelids are getting way too heavy to stay awake. Quinn's voice softly calls out to Melanie as she finally loses the battle with sleep, realizing she's completely out. The next morning, the sun shines through the tall windows of the grand estate. A maid greets Melanie with a cheerful good morning, but Melanie sits up in bed totally lost, asking why she's even in her own room. The maid smiles and explains that Quinn came home late last night and personally carried her all the way there since she was fast asleep. Melanie just stares blankly, repeating the part about him carrying her while her heart starts racing. She starts to wonder if all those things he said weren't just a dream after all, and her face turns bright red as she tries to convince herself there's no way Quinn would actually say stuff like that to her. She's totally spiraling now, clutching her face and trying to figure out if it was real or if she just imagined the whole thing, so she suddenly yells out, asking the maid exactly where Quinn is right now. The maid looks a bit surprised, but tells her she's pretty sure he's already busy working over in the workshop. Melanie finds Quinn in the workshop and quickly welcomes him back. Quinn says he's home while sitting back with some papers, looking totally relaxed among the bookshelves. Melanie stands there looking pretty nervous, trying to start a conversation about everything that happened yesterday, but Quinn just looks at her notes and mentions that it looks like she was really pushing herself. He explains he was just looking over the research papers she left lying around her room, and Melanie watches him, thinking he's just acting like his normal self and that yesterday must have been a dream after all, until Quinn asks if something is wrong. She panics and says everything is fine, then quickly asks how the monster hunt went and if the charm she made helped out at all. Quinn's expression gets serious as he tells her there's actually something he needs to talk to her about regarding that. He explains that the tools made with ancient magic are way too powerful, so much so that the monster they were trying to capture got killed by the barrier it set off. The orb of protection definitely kept him safe, but the power was so crazy it almost ended up hurting his own allies too. Melanie is totally freaked out, saying she can't believe her tool caused all that trouble since it worked perfectly fine during her tests. Quinn starts to put the pieces together, realizing the power of the tool actually scales up based on how much force is hitting it. He figures it only held up during her experiments because the force she used back then was pretty small. Melanie looks worried and says they'll have to remake the whole thing, since it's way too dangerous to show at the exhibition as it is. Quinn reaches out and pats her on the head, telling her not to look so down because they still have time and he's going to help her out. Melanie is totally glowing, thinking about how she gets to do research with Lord Quinn, and she quickly tells him she's in Quinn, then mentions there's going to be a viewing party for the monsters they just caught and asks if she wants to go, leaving Melanie wondering about the event. He explains that the magic exhibition is actually a huge deal for the entire country, and since all the nobles are hyped to see the monsters, they're hosting a pre-party to get a sneak peek at them beforehand, because getting a chance to see these things in person is actually a pretty rare thing. Melanie thinks it over, realizing that getting a sneak peek at the monsters would definitely give them an advantage for the upcoming exhibition. She looks up at Quinn, finally deciding that it's probably a good idea for her to attend the viewing party. Quinn notices her hesitation and asks if she's just not feeling up to the event, but he goes on to explain that while he won't force her, his own attendance is required as a court magician, and he'd love for his fiancée to be there with him. Melanie knows she's terrible at social gatherings, but she tells herself she has to fulfill her duty as his partner and shouts out that she'll go. Quinn gives her this incredibly bright smile, thanking her and saying how happy it makes him to have her come along, which leaves Melanie completely speechless for a second. She starts blushing like crazy, thinking it's totally unfair for him to catch her off guard with a look like that. But soon, the day of the party arrives, and Melanie is instantly overwhelmed by the massive crowd filling the hall. Quinn leans in to check on her, asking if she's doing all right with so many people around. Melanie completely loses her cool and blurts out a panicked yes while looking totally caught off guard. Quinn reaches out a hand to steady her, telling her that she really doesn't have to be this nervous, but she just stammers back a reply, admitting she's on edge since she hasn't been to a social event in forever. The truth is, she's actually distracted because Quinn looks way too good in his formal suit, and while his usual magician uniform is fine, seeing him dressed up like this makes her blush like crazy. She can't stop thinking about how dashing he looks today with his face fully visible for once, and he stands there taking in all the little details of her appearance. Quinn tells her that the pale yellow dress looks great on her, which makes Melanie's face turn bright red as she stutters out a quick thank you. She looks down at the fabric of the dress, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything started with that gift box from Quinn, the one with the big ribbon that totally caught her off guard when it first showed up at her place. Now, standing here in that very dress, Melanie feels her face heating up because hearing him compliment her style again is almost too much. She's so happy in this moment that she's actually worried she'll start reading too much into things. But Quinn just smiles and asks if she's ready to head in, reaching out to take her hand. She manages to stutter out a quick yes while looking up at him, and softly places her hand in his, feeling the spark between them as the two of them finally walk toward the entrance of the massive event hall together. The building is huge, and Melanie realizes her heart has never raced quite like this before. She looks over at him, wondering if she's really the only one whose heart is beating this fast. Melanie looks at Quinn, wondering if he still just sees her as his apprentice, but he cuts through her thoughts by suggesting they go see the monsters. And as they move, she can't help but think that being escorted like this finally makes her feel like his actual fiancé. It's a weird feeling because Julian used to walk her into events all the time back when they were together. Yet, this feels completely different. She stammers out a quick agreement to his plan and follows him closely as they step further into the bright, crowded hall. The scale of the place is wild, and someone nearby mentions how there's a crazy amount of monsters on display, which Quinn confirms by explaining this is just a small part of it. They've even managed to capture whole herds of them. He keeps his cool while explaining that they only keep the most carefully selected species at this location. Quinn looks over at Melanie and admits he's impressed she's staying so calm with dangerous creatures right in front of her. She takes the compliment in stride and asks him where exactly they're keeping all those monsters held up. Quinn explains that the creatures are kept in a special warehouse right behind the castle, all tucked away and kept asleep with some pretty heavy-duty magic, but looking at the massive cages, Melanie notices some of them are huge and starts to worry, asking if she might actually have to face one of those giants. Quinn tells her the matchups are usually picked based on the magic everyone turned in earlier, but sometimes people switch their spells at the last second, making things a bit unpredictable. Melanie just says she gets it, though she looks a little concerned while she thinks it over, and she can't help but wonder what's going to happen if she ends up getting stuck fighting a seriously powerful monster.